Dobar dan, good day, dober večer, good evening. For some people, good morning on the west coast of North America. And my name is Barry Latucci, and I am the executive director and founder of Jasenovac's Research Institute. I want to welcome all of you to the 24th Annual JRI Conference, this year held online and co-hosted by me and my colleagues Alexander Stoyanovich, Olya Meyer, and Pero Kovacevic. And of course, I want to thank uh, Sasha and Olya and Pero for their indispensable and essential work in organizing this conference, especially Sasha. So this year's conference is entitled Remembrance versus Revisionism in Jasenovac's Historical Research and Commemoration. This theme is not only an important one for today's scholars and for the descendants of family members who wish to memorialize the sacrifices and martyrdoms of so many of their family members, but it is essentially what the Jasenovac Research Institute um, has been devoted to for the past quarter of a century. The restoring of historical memory, of historical facts, and restoring the lessons of the genocides committed against Serbs, Jews, and Romas, and of course the massacres of so many anti-fascists. It has been a struggle that we've had to fight, and we continue to fight, because U.S. imperialism and its junior partners in the European Union and elsewhere were determined to omit, to exclude, and to suppress this history. U.S. allied governments, the European Union, Holocaust institutions, and professors at colleges and universities did not, I repeat, did not do their jobs properly. They did not recognize the Jasenovac's death camps complex or the hundreds of thousands of victims of Ustasha genocide. And this did not start in the 1990s when we witnessed Serbs being portrayed as fascists and genocidalists, and the Croat and Bosnian Muslim participants in civil war as heroic anti-fascist victims. It did not start either with the establishment of Holocaust institutions prior to that, who failed to recognize the genocides against Serbs, Jews, and Romas in wartime Yugoslavia. It started immediately after World War II. After World War II ended, when the British and American governments reneged on their promises to turn over Ustasha and Nazi war criminals, according to the Moscow Agreement, and to the countries where they had committed their crimes, and instead recruited them, protected them, gave them new identities and sanctuary, and then employed them, giving them funding to establish neo-fascist networks around the world. And not a few of the Ustasha managed to join Tudjman in the 1990s to help destroy Yugoslavia once again and kill Serbs once again. I hope we learned something from that experience. So this is a global issue that still confronts us, that still distorts the presentation of Holocaust and World War II history. And it's not only a Balkan problem, it's also a problem for the Ukraine and Russia. Contemporary historiography in the United States and Europe and other NATO countries has been warped by this revisionism to downplay the role of the Soviet Union, of Yugoslav partisans, and to portray the US and Britain as the main force fighting against fascism in World War II. this is actually going on now in American and European institutions. Our work, therefore, is a just and important struggle for the truth against revisionism, promoted by those who wish to protect the perpetrators and to come up with and to cover up, their own culpability. Uh, we have to think of this as more than an intellectual struggle. It's a struggle for a better world that is not controlled by an empire with a $1.5 trillion annual budget that considers itself above international laws and human rights and genocide conventions. So that's the end of my short presentation for today. Um, but before I turn over the chair of the conference to Alexander Stoyanovich, I would like us to take a moment of silence to remember the victims of the triple genocide and the anti-fascists who fell in combat against the Ustasha and Nazi forces. Just a moment of silence, please. Thank you. Now I turn over the chair to my distinguished colleague, Dr. Alexander Stoyanovich, and I welcome all of you again to the 24th Annual JRI Conference. Sasha, go ahead.
Thank you, Barry. It's a great privilege and honor to be here with you today and to discuss this very important matter in both the historical and, unfortunately, the contemporary perspective as well. I will start by sharing my presentation. Just a moment. Yeah. And as you can see, it will be focused on the historical revisionism in Jasenovac studies literature, and I would also say public discourse and narrative in the territories of former Yugoslavia or in the post-Yugoslav space. During the night between the 21st and 22nd of April 1945, the final groups of prisoners from Jasenovac system of concentration camps carried out their last and ultimately successful breakout attempt. Of the more than 1,100 inmates who survived to witness the final days of this horrific sight, only 117 ultimately managed to escape to freedom. All the others were killed. Having reached freedom, many of the survivors immediately joined the units of the Yugoslav National Liberation Army, so the partisans, which in the following days liberated Yugoslavia and together with the Allies defeated Nazism and fascism in this region. In symbolic terms, this marked the triumph of the highly heterogeneous and often mutually antagonistic anti-fascist and liberationist forces over the terror, chaos, the irrational violence embodied by the Ustasha ideology and the independent state of Croatia, which will be referred from here onward as the NDH. However, revolutionary terror in the post-war Yugoslavia, the ideologically prescribed interpretation of the Second World War, and especially the changing geopolitical circumstances brought about by the onset of the Cold War, all contributed to the emergence of the revisionist interpretations of Jasenovac and the NDH already in the first post-war years. Over time, this revisionism evolved, adapting itself to changing political circumstances and propaganda needs, eventually becoming deeply embedded in the collective memory and the political culture of the Yugoslav peoples. Unfortunately, today such revisionist narratives occupy a far greater place in public discourse and popular perceptions regarding Jasenovac's, the crimes committed there, and the nature of the NDH than do the findings of rigorous scholarly research and academic historiography. In this way, the victims and their suffering are diminished, descendants of victims and survivors continue to experience profound emotional pain, and political tensions in the territory of the former Yugoslavia, and particularly regarding the Serbian Croatian relations, are continuously reproduced. What then can we state with confidence about the independent state of Croatia and the Jasenovac's concentration camp system? The NDH was a satellite state of Nazi Germany, and its creation was made possible only through the occupation of Yugoslav territory by Nazi and fascist forces. It was a totalitarian state whose dominant political force was the Ustasha movement, the most radical expression of extreme Croatian nationalism, chauvinism, Serbophobia, and anti-Semitism. Owing both to this ideological background and to the broader historical context of total war and the Holocaust unfolding across Europe, a mass genocide was perpetrated on the territory of the NDH against Serbs, Jews, and Roma. The Ustasha regime governed through terror and brutal repression directed against all so-called undesirable elements, nepočudni elementi, defined according to racist and ideological criteria. At the same time, it would be historically inaccurate to attribute sole responsibility for the character of the NDH and the mass crimes committed within exclusively to Ante Pavelić and his closest associates. When the broad and heterogeneous body of historical sources concerning the NDH is examined from a historical and critical distance, free from ideological or ethnocentric bias, a much more complex picture emerges. Above all, the establishment of an independent Croatian national state initially enjoyed widespread support across virtually all social strata of the Croatian population. That support gradually weakened as many honorable Croats were horrified by Ustasha massacres and the torture of civilians, while many others turned against the regime only after experiencing retaliatory violence from Chetnik and partisan forces themselves. Nevertheless, the idea of a Croatian nationalist state remains sufficiently powerful that the final collapse of the NDH occurred only after Germany's capitulation and the overall defeat of Nazism and fascism in Europe. Even more than the broader population, Croatian political elites provided legitimacy and support to the NDH and its policies. Numerous members and officials of the Croatian Peasant Party entered the government, administrative institutions, local authorities, and armed formations of the new state. Until the collapse of Yugoslavia in April 1941, this party had been the dominant political force among Croatian voters, while its leader, Dr. Vlatko Maček, was widely perceived as a national leader of the Croats. The participation of prominent Croatian Peasant Party figures in the structures of the NDH granted political legitimacy to Pavelić and the Ustasha movement and helped construct the narrative that the Ustasha state represented the culmination of centuries-long Croatian aspirations for national statehood. The responsibility of Croatian political elites also extended far beyond occupied Yugoslavia. In London, where the Yugoslav royal government in exile spent most of the war, Croatian ministers frequently denied or minimized reports of Ustasha massacres and the mass suffering of Serbs reaching the British capital. Similar attitudes could be found among much of the non-Ustasha Croatian emigre communities, including figures such as Bogdan Radica and his associates in the Yugoslav Information Center in New York. Finally, Croatian communists, both during the war itself and in the post-war period, often sought, sometimes openly and sometimes under the cover of criticism of the Yugoslav monarchy and slogans of brotherhood and unity, to minimize the scale of crimes committed in the NDH and to shift responsibility entirely onto the Ustasha, the occupiers, and the Chetniks. In comparison with political elites, however, the Roman Catholic Church and its clergy in Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina arguably provided even greater legitimacy and support to the NDH and its brutal policies. The Church supported Pavelić and the Ustaša regime, carried out diplomatic missions on behalf of the NDH, and worked towards an international recognition and affirmation. In domestic affairs, the Catholic Church strongly supported discriminatory measures and repression directed against Serbs and Jews. Numerous priests participated in organizing crimes against Serbs, denounced victims, and disseminated inflammatory propaganda and hate speech, both from the church pulpits and through religious and daily newspapers. Among the Catholic clergy were individuals who occupied high-ranking positions within the Ustasha and the government hierarchy, including figures such as the Franciscan priest Radoslav Glavac, who served as a state secretary within the Ministry of Justice and Religion. Through propaganda, a section of the clergy openly endorsed extreme nationalist policies and called for the expulsion and destruction of Serbs and Jews. Neither Archbishop Aloysius Stepinac nor the Croatian Bishops' Conference, nor any leading Catholic prelate at the time publicly condemned the crimes committed against Serbs, Jews, and Roma, nor openly denounced the Ustaše, Pavelić, or NDH authorities. Although we know from the historical sources that some church figures privately disapproved of Ustaše policies and atrocities, such sentiments generally remained confined to private conversations or discreet communication with regime officials. As well, Pope Pius XII likewise failed publicly to condemn these crimes or to offer explicit protection to the persecuted. Already during the first wave of anti-Serb violence in late spring and summer of 1941, the Ustaša authorities and the Catholic Church initiated a campaign of mass conversions of Orthodox Serbs to Catholicism. The scale of these so-called religious conversions was unprecedented. According to the research of Croatian historian Dr. Margareta Matijević, annual religious conversions in Croatia during the 19th and early 20th century rarely exceeded 1,000 and were generally associated with mixed marriages. Under the NDH, however, entire Serbian villages and towns were collectively converted, with the number of conversions in some months reaching tens of thousands. It is estimated that more than 200,000 Serbs were forced, under varying forms of coercion and pressure, to request and undergo religious conversion. Croatian historian Dr. Filip Škiljan has published a 3-volume study based on Catholic parish records, documenting nearly 70,000 individual cases of such conversions in detail. The participation of the Catholic Church in the conversion campaign transcended the religious sphere, since abandoning Orthodoxy effectively implied national conversions from Serbs into Croats, under both the legal framework and political practice of the NDH. Finally, through the activities of church-affiliated figures such as Dr. Krunoslav Draganović, leading Ustaša officials and individuals responsible for major crimes were assisted in escaping to South America after the war, thereby avoiding persecution and justice. The Croatian intellectual, academic, and cultural elite also largely supported Pavelić's regime and quickly placed itself in the service of extreme nationalist policies. Institutions such as Matica Hrvatska, University of Zagreb, cultural organizations, and numerous individual intellectuals and artists supported the genocidal policies of the NDH, while many openly glorified Pavelić and the Ustaša movement in their works. Even intellectuals and artists who were not ideologically aligned with Ustaša often continued their professional activities while ignoring the mass suffering and terror inflicted upon Serbs, Jews, Roma, and all political opponents of the regime, regardless of nationality or race. Many changed political alliance only when the collapse of Nazism and fascism became increasingly apparent. The sculptor Anton Augustinčić, for example, initially produced a portrait bust of Ante Pavelić in 1942 before defecting to the Partizan the following year. and later achieving the height of his career in socialist Yugoslavia. A similar trajectory characterized the writer Gustav Krklec, who published his book The Prison of Time from 1939 to 1941 in Zagreb in 1944, receiving the Medal of Tomislav decoration from Pavelić for it, only to become a post-war president of Matica Hrvatska and the subsequent president of the Yugoslav Writers Association. Many of these individuals never faced consequences for their cooperation with the NDH and Ustasha, thereby contributing to the normalization of such conduct. Now that we have outlined, at least in a general terms, the broad responsibility borne by segments of Croatian national elites for developments in the NDH, we may briefly turn to the crimes themselves. The NDH was a state in which mass violence occurred daily and in which virtually no region was spared the mass suffering of local Serbs, Jews, and Roma. Civilian victims, especially Serbs, were often murdered in or near their own homes, or at nearby pits and execution sites. The massacres committed against Serbian civilians throughout the NDH were vast in number and staggering in brutality, ranging from Gudovac as early as in April of 1941, to Veljun in May, Korita and Metković in June, Ličko Petrovo Selo, Čelebić, and the church massacre in Glina in July, Sanski Most and Prebilovci in August of 1941, to the massacres in Draksenić, Drakulić, Šargovac, and Motike in early 1942, to mention only some of the most notorious cases. Most victims were killed in exceptionally brutal ways, frequently accompanied by torture, rape, looting, and the burning of homes and even entire villages. Although the Ustasha played the leading role in these crimes, local participation was not uncommon. Fueled by an intensive propaganda and long cultivated hatred, some Croats murdered former neighbors and acquaintances and seized their property. The geographic distribution of these crimes revealed a continuous trail of violence across the entire territory of the NDH. The independent state of Croatia maintained a large network of concentration camps. More than 20 major camps operated for extended periods and claimed thousands of victims each, while some 40 camps existed overall. Unlike many camps established by Nazi Germany, camps in the NDH were not primarily designed for economic exploitation, even though certain sections of the Jasenovac system possessed limited production functions. Their principal purpose was the elimination of the social and national groups designated by the Ustasha as undesirable. Daily life in these camps was characterized by severe physical and psychological abuse, starvation, disease, terror, and omnipresent death. Probably the first concentration camp in the NDH was Danica near Koprivnica, established already in mid-April 1941. However, during the first months of the Ustasha regime, perhaps the most brutal condition existed within the Gospić prison camp complex, which evolved during the summer of 1941 into the Gospić Jadovno Pag camp system. In only 4 months of operation, approximately 40,000 people, primarily Serbs and Jews, were killed there through shootings, throat cutting, bludgeoning, by being thrown alive into the karst pits of Velebit or into the waters surrounding the island of Pag. An increasing number of historians and Holocaust scholars, including the British historian Dr. Jori Romans, Italian historian based in Serbia Milovan Pisari, and myself, regard the Gospić Jadovno Pag complex as probably the first true death camp established in Europe during the Second World War, more than half a year before the formation of so-called final solution and the order for building of the massive death camps in the east of Europe. When this camp system was closed in late August 1941, following the Italian reoccupation of part of the NDH territory, the surviving prisoners were transferred to the vicinity of the Jasenovac village, specifically to the camps at Bročice and Krapje, the first components of what would become the largest death camp complex in the Balkans, the Jasenovac concentration camp system. Jasenovac has remained recorded in the history of civilization as one of the most brutal concentration camp systems in the 20th century. In terms of both the number of victims and the suffering inflicted upon prisoners, it was the largest and most notorious camp of the Second World War in Europe, not directly administered by Nazi Germany. The system encompassed multiple sites in and around Jasenovac itself, including former industrial facilities owned by the Serbian Bačić family, brickworks, leather factory, chain factory, Stara Gradiška, Donja Gradina, mass execution grounds, Roma camp at Uštica, and various affiliated agricultural estates that was worked by prisoners in the nearby villages. Approximately 90,000 victims have thus far been identified by name, including over 20,000 children under the age of 14. The actual number of victims has never been conclusively established and likely never can be, partly because of the deliberate destruction of evidence. It is nevertheless certain that the total number was significantly higher than the currently documented figure. The Jasenovac camp system became the central symbol of the martyrdom in the innocent civilians in the NDH, whether Serbs, Jews, Roma, especially Roma, whose almost entire pre-war population was exterminated in Jasenovac, or Croatian anti-fascists and members of other national groups. It is important to emphasize, however, that the suffering happened in other camps too, including Tenja, Đakovo, Lobograd, Caprag, Lepoglava, Livno, Jastrebarsko, and Sajmište near Zemun in present-day Belgrade. The issue that remained scientifically unresolved concerns the total number of victims. This question has become one of the principal points of political conflict and fertile ground for revisionists on both the Croatian and Serbian sides. From the perspective of scholarly historiography, it must be stressed that the primary reason the numbers of victims was never reliably established lies in the ideological and political interests of post-war Yugoslav and Croatian authorities after 1945. The figures published by the Croatian Land Commission for the Investigation of Crimes and later by the Yugoslav State Commission for the Crimes of Occupiers and their collaborators, which estimated between 500,000 and 700,000 victims in the Jasenovac camp system alone, reflected the revolutionary political climate of the time and were not based on any scientifically rigorous methodology. More on this you will have a chance to hear in Tamara Stojanovic's presentation later. Subsequent name-based victim registration, according to Yad Vashem methodology, let's say, have identified approximately 83,000 victims according to the Jasenovac Memorial Institution in Croatia, and somewhat more than 90,000 according to the Museum of Genocide Victims in Belgrade. Yet narratives claiming over 1 million victims, on the one hand, or I'm quoting only several thousand to 20,000, end of the quote, on the other, continue to circulate widely today. This bargaining with the number of the dead and with the suffering of destroyed families represents one of the darkest aspects of contemporary political discourse in the post-Yugoslav region. Croatianist revisionist narratives concerning the mass crimes of the NDH and Jasenovac as their central symbol emerged already during the war itself and in the immediate post-war years. Initially, they focused primarily on relativizing the crimes, especially their scale and brutality. Ustasha emigres who escaped through the so-called Red Lines to Spain, Germany, North and South America denied responsibility for atrocities. In immigrant publications such as Hrvatska Revija Journal, they portrayed Ustaša repression as a reaction to greater Serbian nationalism and communist resistance activities, while depicting Jasenovac as merely a labor and penal institution intended for anti-state elements. Authors promoting such interpretations included Branimir Jelić, Ante Crljen, Vinko Nikolić, and Ante Beljo, to name just a few. The inversion of responsibility reached grotesque proportions. The Ustasha, Catholic clergy, and the NDH authorities were presented as victims of Chetnik and communist violence, while mass crimes against Serbs, Jews, and Roma were either denied outright or reframed as spontaneous acts of revenge allegedly committed by wild Ustashe, uncontrolled local elements acting without official authorization. This mechanism of revisionism and inversion of responsibility became foundational for later Croatian revisionist narratives concerning the NDH and the Second World War in total. A major role in the revision of Croatian Yugoslav history was played by the former Yugoslav general and later Croatian president Dr. Franjo Tudjman. He was among the first prominent figures to describe the NDH as a legitimate expression of Croatian aspirations for statehood, albeit while formally condemning Ustaša crimes, and among the first mainstream historians of the era to drastically reduce the estimate number of victims at Jasenovac, lowering it to approximately 40,000. As the leader who guided Croatia to its independence and acquired the status of a founding father of the nation, Tudjman gave a powerful impetus to broader efforts to relativize and reinterpret crimes committed in the NDH. According to the emerging narrative, the established interpretation of Ustaša crimes was supposedly exaggerated and represented part of a Serbo-communist conspiracy against Croatia and Croatian national identity. Nationalist intellectual circles, sections of the Catholic clergy, and descendants of the Ustaša emigres embraced this reinterpretation enthusiastically. During the wars of 1990s, when the victims of the Second World War were routinely instrumentalized by all sides in the Yugoslav conflict, Ustaša, Chetnik, and Ljotićite narratives re-entered the mainstream discourse. In Croatian public life, the concept of the so-called Serbian myth of Jasenovac gained prominence alongside attempts to minimize or deny the camp's genocidal character. Simultaneously, the myth of Bleiburg tragedy and the Way of the Cross became central element of Croatian national memory, with victim estimate rising exponentially from roughly 10,000 to as many as 600,000. Jasenovac and Bleiburg thus became the principal focal points of competing ideological narratives in Croatia. The underlying objective was clear: to portray Croats not primarily as the perpetrators of the genocide, but as the victims themselves. In the early 21st century, coinciding with Tudjman's death, political changes in Croatia, and the intensification of Euro-Atlantic integrations, revisionist efforts increasingly sought academic legitimacy. The Zagreb-based publicist Igor Vukic founded the Society for Research of the Triple Jasenovac camp, which became a focal point for revisionist, nationalist, and clerical circles, denying the genocidal character of the NDH and Jasenovac. Central to their narrative is the claim that a Titoist camp operated at Jasenovac from 1945 to 1952, where thousands of Croatian patriots were allegedly executed and or buried, including even some victims of the Bleiburg and the Way of the Cross. This revisionist tendency has also been linked to the broader European anti-totalitarian memory politics. The organization explicitly invokes Council of the Europe Resolution 1481 from the year 2006 concerning the condemnation of the crimes committed by totalitarian communist regimes. Historians associated with this organization include Dr. Blanka Matković and Dr. Stipo Pilić. Matković has publicly argued that revising the history of Jasenovac is a prerequisite for Croatian national freedom. Vukic himself published a book, Jasenovac's Labor Camp, in which he denies that Jasenovac ever functioned as a death camp. Authors associated with these circles often claim that even the officially documented figure of approximately 80,000 identified victims is vastly exaggerated. Some, such as Mladen Ivezic, who enjoys considerable support from sections of the Catholic clergy, argue that the number of victims I'm quoting could not have exceeded 1,000. End of quotation. However, a certain form of revisionism also exists on the Serbian side. It has been shaped by historical trauma, the fact that many perpetrators were never punished, and the tendency of nationalist and populist actors to manipulate the memory of victims and the fear and anger associated with these crimes. In Serbian collective memory, Jasenovac has become not merely a concentration camp complex in which Serbs, Jews, Roma, and anti fascists were murdered, but also a central component of identity formation, especially among Serbs originating from the territories of Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. I will never forget an anecdote recounted to me by colleagues employed at the Museum of Genocide Victims in Belgrade. Their work involves gathering evidence and registering victims of the genocide in the NDH. On several occasions, they encountered visitors who reacted with anger or even aggression when archival documentation demonstrated that their ancestors or relatives had in fact been killed in local massacres or other execution sites rather than at Jasenovac itself. The narrative of Jasenovac as the singular and overarching site of Serbian national suffering during the Second World War has become so powerful that the victims killed elsewhere are sometimes implicitly perceived as less significant. From the perspective of a scholar who studied mass crimes for more than 15 years, I would argue that this reflects a deeply problematic and ultimately unhealthy relationship toward victims and war crimes that has been cultivated in Serbian society for decades already. Part of the Serbian revisionism can also be seen in attempts to relativize or justify certain war crimes committed during the conflicts of the 1990s by presenting them as necessary measures to prevent, I'm paraphrasing, another genocide like the one that happened in the NDH. The narrative is particularly present in Republika Srpska and functions as an important mechanism of political mobilization and resistance to international pressure. Although such attitudes can be understood within the context of highly complex political circumstances, it would be irresponsible not to point out that they are ultimately harmful and that they rest upon the political instrumentalization of innocent victims from the Second World War era. Finally, one additional form of historical revisionism currently is visible in Serbia. It involves the misuse of terms such as Ustaše and fascists by political authorities to label the student protesters demonstrating against corruption, institutional decline, and democratic backsliding. In conclusion, it is necessary to assess the current state of historical revisionism concerning Jasenovac and the crimes of the NDH. The overwhelming majority of professional Croatian historians, especially those specializing in the Second World War, have no serious doubts regarding the nature of the events that occurred between 1941 and 1945. They clearly and unequivocally describe these crimes as genocide against Serbs, Jews, and Roma, while assigning Jasenovac a central place as the largest individual site of mass murder. The same is true for their colleagues in Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. Serious scholarly literature, and increasingly even school textbooks, strive to address these issues responsibly and with due respect toward victims and the complexities of victim statistics. Outside the realm of professional historiography and victim research, however, revisionist tendencies, nationalist narratives, populist manipulation, and various forms of political instrumentalization remain widespread. These are promoted by politicians, sections of clergy, including even certain bishops of both Catholic and Orthodox Church, and various formal and informal organizations attempting to construct a parallel culture of memory that either ignore or openly disparage the result of scholarly research. For this reason, I would like ultimately to conclude by invoking one of the principal mottos of the Jasenovac Research Institute: let the truth be known. We must resist political and unscientific distortions of history that insult the memory of the countless victims of one of the most extensive and horrific episodes of mass suffering in the modern history. Thank you all for being here with us today. Okay, this was my presentation. I would now like to pass the floor to Tamara Stojanovic. She is a PhD candidate based in Belgrade, who is working on her dissertation at the Faculty of Philosophy in Belgrade, at the Department for History of Yugoslavia. And after some 7 or 8 years of work at the Archives of Yugoslavia, she recently started working with Haver Serbia, a NGO highly committed to the Holocaust research and memory culture and education. Tamara will present about the Yugoslav State Commission for the War Crime Investigation and also the Land Commission from Croatia, and what actually they collected regarding the Jasenovac concentration camp system, in particular the testimonies of the camp inmates. I will share the presentation, and we can get going.
Thank you very much. Dear audience, today I have the honor of presentation my lecture with the title Post-War Investigation of Jasenovac by the Croatian Land Commission for the War Crimes and the Yugoslav State Commission for the War Crimes Investigation. During this lecture, we will discuss the work of the State Commission, the collection of the materials related to the crimes committed in the Jasenovac concentration camp, and the testimonies gathered to the course of this investigation. The Second World War raised the question of the systematic documentation of mass crimes and the establishment of responsibility for their perpetrators. Within the broader Allied efforts to prosecute war crimes after the war, the process of creating international and national institutions responsible for collecting evidence, testimonies, and documentation concerning crimes committed by occupying forces and their collaborators began already during the war itself. As early as 1942 and 1943, Allied governments discussed the ways in which punishment for crimes committed through Europe would be organized after the war. In this context, the establishment of the United Nations War Crimes Commission in London in October 1943 was the particular importance. Its primary task was to collect material concerning the war crimes and compile lists of suspected war criminals. This was the first institution established by Allies specifically for the purpose of collecting evidence and prosecuting war crimes committed by members of the Axis powers. The president of the commission, Lord Wright, emphasized that the commission's task was to ensure that the failure which occurred after the war of 1914 and 1918, when war criminals were not brought to the justice, would not happen again. All states of the anti-fascistic coalition became members of the commission except the Soviet Union, which chose to remain outside due to disagreement with the Western governments, particularly its instances that representatives of 7 Soviet republics also be included in the commission. A partial resolution of those issues was archived through the Moscow Declaration of the Three Great Powers on the November 1st, 1943. Following the establishment of the United Nations War Crimes Commission and the conclusion of the first international agreements, one of the most significant steps in the punishment of war crimes was the Moscow Declaration, also known as the Declaration of the Four Powers. Of particular importance was the Moscow Conference held between 19 and 13 October 1943, the first in series of Allied conferences at which decisions of crucial importance for the future of the Balkans and Eastern Europe were made. At the same time, the Moscow Declaration stipulated that perpetrators of crimes should be returned to the countries in which those crimes have been committed so that they could be tried before domestic justical authorities. Accordingly, in the most post-war European states, special institutions were established with the task of determining the type, scope, location, time, and the manner of crime committed, as well as the responsibility of perpetrator and collaborators. The primary function of those bodies was to conduct investigations and collect evidentiary material concerning both individual cases and large-scale crimes, thereby creating the necessary basis for future justical proceedings. This process was also closely committed with the broader post-war reconstructuring of legal institutions and the federal reorganization of the state, within which commissions for the investigation of war crimes committed during the Second World War occupied the particularly significant place. In line with those developments, the process of creating an institutional framework for the investigation of war crimes also began in Yugoslavia during the 1943. By decision of the Anti-Fascist Council for the National Liberation of Yugoslavia, adopted during the second session in Jajce on 13 November 1943, the State Commission for the Investigation of Crimes Committed by the Occupiers and their collaborators were established. Under the presidency of the National Committee for the Liberation of Yugoslavia, the Commission was tasked with determining responsibility, locating, and bringing to justice individuals responsible for crimes committed during the war by occupiers and their collaborators on Yugoslavia territory. Although the collection of information for the prosecution of war criminals and traitors had already existed as a practice of military and civilian authorities during the First World War, the scale, mass character, and brutality of crimes committed between 1941 and 1945 created the need for specialized and institutionally organized body whose primary purpose would be the systematic investigation of such crimes. The Commission was active until 1945 when it was dissolved by the Yugoslav authorities. The Commission's main task was to establish responsibility, identify, and to bring to justice persons who had committed crimes on the territory of Yugoslavia during the war. Its scope included various forms of criminal acts: murders, bodily harm, abuse, internments, unlawful arrests and sentences, rare looting and arson, bombing, etc. Accepted evidentiary material included testimonies of defendants, accomplices of witnesses, official documents, letters, posters, books, newspapers, photographs, and film recording depicting locations, traces of violence, instruments used in the commission of crimes, and the perpetrators themselves. Evidence was collected through reports submitted by victims and other citizens on site, investigation at places and suffering such as prisoners, concentration camps, exhumative of mass graves, investigators in prison of war and labor camps, the interrogates of suspects and their collaborators. In addition of the State Commission as the center institution, 8 republic level and provincial commissions were established, one for each federal unit and administrative region. Soon afterward, subordinate commissions with territorial jurisdiction within republics and provinces were also created, as well as special inquiry commissions tasked with the detailed investigation and documentation of particular mass crime. Together, those bodies formed a broad institutional network responsible for collecting and systemating evidentiary material through the country. When we speak about the process of collecting and systematic material on crimes in Yugoslavia, following the establishment of the State Commission, the adoption of procedural regulations, and the formation of republic-level and regional commissions, conditions were created for the systematic collection of information concerning war crimes. This process did not wait for the complete institutional consolidation of the network of commissions. Rather, it began simultaneously with their establishment, reflecting the urgent need to gather evidentiary material and document crimes as quickly as possible. In order to standardize its work, the State Commission sought through regulation and instructions to precisely define the methodology for collecting, proceeding, and systematic material. Particular attention was devoted to standardized form, which had to be completed accordingly to predefined rules in order to avoid arbitrariness and ensure the comparability of collected material. Those forms included categories such as victims, locations, dates, methods of executions of crimes, and material damage. The crucial role in the process of collecting information was played by a network of commissioners and local commissions who gather information directly in the field. Their work was organized systematically, often from house to house, and separate reports were compiled for every crime, every victim, and every perpetrator. Sources of information included testimonies of victims and witnesses, statements by perpetrator and his collaborator, various documents such as letters, posters, newspapers, and official acts, as well as photographs and the other evidentiary material. Special emphasis was placed on collecting information concerning crimes committed in areas where no surviving family members remained, as well as crimes committed against foreign nationals whenever reliable information existed. This requestment reflects the ambition to extend the scope of investigation beyond the narrow framework of immediately eyewitnesses' testimony. Reports contained strictly defined elements, including information concerning perpetrator, victims, locations, and time of crimes, evidence, material damage, etc. Based on these submitted forms, the State Commissions created its own card index system, which became the basis for further proceeding and analysis. Those indexes were organized according to multiple criteria, including the indexes of perpetrators, victims, and thematic categories such as mass crimes, camps, and deportation. This method represents an attempt to process the material in systematic and analytic manner. Through the entire period of their activity, according to a complicated date, the Yugoslav Commission Collective gathered 838,828 verified reports submitted by victims and citizens, more than 548,902 testimonies, almost 19,000 documents originated from enemy sources, more than 5,860 photographs of war criminals and crimes, as well as a suitable number of expert reports, records of investigators, posters, publication, and press collection. Based on this material, 160,239 individual decisions were issued, established evidentiary material concerning approximately 66,420 war criminals, collaborators, and accomplices. In addition, 166 thematic studies and reports were produced, many of which poses the value of legal historical monographs alongside 68 schematic overviews of occupying and collaborationist organizations, indexes, registers, and involvement. Despite numbers, organization, and methodological difficulties, the work of the State Commission and the Republic-level Land Commission represented one of the largest and the most significant post-war projects of documenting war crimes in Yugoslavia. The collected material served multiple purposes as a basis for criminal prosecutions, for international organizations, and extradition, the procedure involving the war criminals, and as documentary material for historical researches. Although the reliability of all collected data was not always equal due to different working conditions, shortages of trained personnel, and the political circumstances in which commissions operated, the material created through their work today represents one of the most significant archive collections for the study of the war crimes, occupation systems, collaborationist, and post-war justice in Yugoslavia. At the same time, the work of those commissions constitute an important historical source not only for the study of war crimes themselves, but also for the understanding the ways in which the new Yugoslav authorities approached questions of justice, responsibility, and memory after the Second World War. The majority of material concerning the Jasenovac concentration camp system was collected through the work of the Croatian Land Commission and its local bodies, which immediately after liberation began gathering testimonies of survivors, eyewitnesses' accounts, and documenting relating to the crimes committed within the Jasenovac concentration camp. Before turning to the testimonies themselves, it's important to address the question of how we read and how we interpret this type of sources today. Testimonies collected immediately after the war should not be understood as a simple and direct window into the past. At the same time, they represent personal memories of survivors, legal documents, and produce the institutional framework within which they were created. For this reason, such sources must be approached critically and on the multiple levels. Several questions need to be considered. Who is giving the testimonies? When was it recorded? Before whom? Under what circumstances and for what purpose? It is also important to take account the age of the witness, the temporal distance from the events being described, the possible impacts of trauma, national or ideological bias, and the ways in which questions were posed by the commissions themselves. At the same time, the fact that those testimonies were created within a specific political and institutional context does not diminish their historical value. On the contrary, they represent one of the most significant sources for the study of Jasenovac's concentration system, not only because the information they contain about the crimes, but also because of the way survivors shaped their memories, described violence, and testified to experience of life and death inside the camp. Certain recurring patterns can be observed in the testimonies collected by the Croatian State Commission. Describing of mass killing, starvation, forced labor, diseases, and everyday physical violence appear rapidly through the material. At the same time, witnesses often provide highly detailed description of the camp space, the structure of the Ustasha administration, methods of punishment, and relationship among prisoners. Particularly important are those parts of those testimonies dealing with everyday life in the camp, as they allow for a deeper understanding of how the system of violence within Jasenovac functioned. It is also noticeable that the Commission frequently attempted to structure testimonies according to the anticipated needs of the future judicial proceeding. As a result, particular emphasis was placed on identifying perpetrator, specifically on the time and phase of crimes, and describing methods of violence. This legal framework significantly influences the very form and the structure for the testimonies themselves. Having outlines of institutional framework of the State Commission and the regional commissions, the second part of this presentation will focus on the analyze the testimonies collected by Croatian State Commission immediately after the war. For the purposes of this research, a group of testimonies was selected from the different categories of survivors and witnesses, men and women, individuals of different nationality and age, educational backgrounds, social and professional status, as well as persons who entered the camp during the different places and of the extents. This diversity of sources provide a broader insight into the experience of Jasenovac and demonstrates the complexity of the ways in which survivors remembered and interpreted their experience. At the same time, it's important to emphasize that those testimonies were not approached as the homogeneous body of material. Rather, they were analyzed through the several thematic groups in order to identify different aspects of camp experience, as well as the ways in which the Commission structured and recorded survivors' testimonies. The first group considered testimonies dealing with arrest, transport, and arriving at the camp. Those accounts place particular emphasis on arrests, separation from family members, transport in castle wagons, first in courts with Ustasha guards, and initial impression of the camp itself. In many cases, those testimonies represent prisoners' first encounter with the system of organized violence and terror. The second group consists the testimonies concerning everyday life in the camp. Those include descriptions of accommodation, food, forced labor, diseases, hygienic conditions, relationship among prisoners, and various survival mechanisms. This category of sources provide a deeper understanding of their life inside the camp and the function of system of control, punishment, and dehumanization. The third group includes testimonies concerning suffering and mass violence. Those accounts contain describing of torture, individual and mass killing, execution, disappearances of prisoners, as well as testimonies about the physical consequences of living under the constant fear. Particularly important are those passengers in which witnesses attempt to identify perpetrators, reconstruction mechanism of violence, and explain the function of the camp system in itself. Finally, the special attention will be given to the report of the Investigate Commission that entered the Jasenovac camp area immediately after its closure, with the task of documenting the conditions of the site, collecting material evidence, and conducting the first on-site investigations. This report is of exceptional importance because it represents one of the earliest institutional attempts to reconstruct the camp space immediately after its close. The addition of the describing the physical trace of crimes, the report also reflects the efforts of post-war authorities to document the scale of crimes committed at Jasenovac as quickly as possible and to secure evidence for a future justical proceeding. In order to better understand how those testimonies were produced and how they function within the work of the commissions, I will first present each testimony in Italy. The aim of this approach is not only to reconstruct individual camp experience, but also to examine the structure of the testimonies themselves, the way questions were posed, the themes witnesses emphasized as important, and the relationship between personal memory and the institutional framework in which the testimony was accorded. When we come to the testimonies, the first thematic group considered the testimonies concerning arrest, transport, and arrival to the Jasenovac camp. Those accounts represent the initial phase of camp experience and in many cases contain extremely vivid description of prisoners' first encounter with the system of organized violence. Now looking on this page, from the left side, you can see the first page of the documents, and then from the right side, you can see one part of it. And also, the idea was to describe for those who are not speaking the Serbo-Croatian language. So now we have one testimony Dan Ban Grebljanović Anka, and she said, on 17 July 1942, I was taken during the night, although I have been arrested during the day, to the Jasenovac camp. After we had spent 4 days in a sealed railway wagon without the food or drink. And since there was no room in Jasenovac, I was transferred to Stara Gradiška, where I stayed for about a month. And at one point, 2,000 women were brought there at once. When I was arrested in Glina on 17 July 1942, I did not want to go within the first truck, but instead went with the third truck, while the first truck carrying around 80 women and children was taken by the Ustasha to Prekopa, where they slaughtered them all in a barn. The another testimony was done by Dr. Zrinko Tkalec. At the end of May 1942, in the transport of 10 people, I was transferred from the Ustasha prison on Savska Street in Zagreb through the Jasenovac to Stara Gradiška. In Jasenovac, they replaced our chains with the fire, tied our hands behind our backs, and loaded us into a truck to transport us to Gradiška. The fire cut into our flesh, and the pain in our hands was unbearable. The another testimony was done by Ešref Badnjević. This one is a little bit longer than the another one. In Jasenovac, they sent those to whom they had not already killed in the prisons, in Maksimir or in Rakov Potok. Those were masses of people, thousands upon thousands, men, women, and children, Serbs, Croats, Jews, and Roma. People from all social backgrounds were imprisoned there. Workers and peasants, professionals and physicals, ordinary citizens and criminals alike. By the time of my arrival at the camp, approximately 3 months after the establishment, more than 100,000 people had already been killed. They were murdered either inside the camp itself or its facility buried there. Jasenovac had become a terrifying vortex of hell in which human beings perished and disappeared like fields. We lay down on a bare wooden planks, packed so tightly that we were forced to lie turned on our sides, pressed against the another. He also said, we had no opportunity to wash ourselves or change our clothes. Lice crawled through the barks, moved across our bodies. They fed on our blood and drained the little strait we still had left. We also have the one testimony done by Siniša Mihajlović, who arrived at Jasenovac from different camps. So he said that he arrived at Jasenovac in the first transport of prisoners from the Jastrebarsko camp. Prior to that, I had been transferred to Jastrebarsko from Notary's Gospić camp, where I had been imprisoned as a former Yugoslav officer captured while returning from German captivity. One part for his testimony was also about the life in the concentration camp. So he said, we arrived in Jasenovac on 22 October 1941. From the railway station, we were immediately taken to the Ustasha hill quarters, where the Ustasha first searched us thoroughly and confiscates our money, cigarettes, and all our valuables. After that, we were transferred to the camp in the forest, later known as Camp Number 2. It was night, and we were locked inside a wooden building, which we only discovered the following morning had served as a morgue. We came to this conclusion because when morning arrived, several dead bodies were found among us. The distance from the camp administration in the village to Camp Number 2 in the forest was approximately 5 kilometers. We were forced to march the entire way while singing. Those who were unable to sing were beaten and trampled. He also said, already on the first day, we were ordered to drag log through to the embankment where prisoners were working. We carried full cauldrons of the food to the work site and on the return journey, we carried back empty containers together with the beaten and frozen prisoners. At the beginning, the camp was improvised and consisted of only 3 hastily constructed barracks. The wooden planks were not even properly joined together, so during rainy days the rain poured directly into us, while strong winds blew through the gaps. The camp was surrounded by dense barbed fire approximately 3 meters high and was heavily guarded by Ustaše. At that time, there were around 4,000 Serbs and Jewish prisoners in the camp. 2 barracks housed Jewish prisoners, while one was reserved for the Serbian prisoners. Also, he wrote testimonies. While we were working, the Ustaše would light fires nearby in several grounds and then call over one of the prisoners to join them. When a prisoner approached, they would ask him where he was from and whither he was called, offering him the chance to warm himself on the fire. Once the prisoner admitted that he wished to warm himself, the Ustaše would force him to undress and then beat him mercilessly with braided whips made of willow branches until he died. Such as similar forms of Ustaše entertainment took place on a daily basis. About the situation in the camp, he also wrote, "The food provided for Serbian prisoners consisted for lunch of a spoonful of tine bean soup without bread, while Jewish prisoners received 3 potatoes and nothing more. For dinner, we sometimes received nothing at all, and at the other time boiled potatoes with the skin on, against without bread. That autumn, heavy rains fell conditionally for days and weeks, and the ground became so flooded with mud that people were barely able to work. The labor on the embankment was indescribably difficult and nearly impossible. One day, while we were attempting to work under relentless rain, Max Luburic arrived and began shouting at us at the top of his voice because we were not working fast enough. He called us vermin, bandits, and criminals, accompanying his insults with threats. He then drew his pistol on the fire, fired several shots into the group of prisoners where they were most densely guarded. 1 Jewish prisoner was killed, while Obrat Bosnic, a student from Bijeljina, was wounded in his leg. As a result of such nutrition, the prisoners gradually became so weakened and exhausted that they lost not only the appearance of human being, but also any sense of dignity and honor. They lost all human characteristics and identity, becoming, in the truest sense, reduced in the condition of animals. I remember clearly that in the barracks we slept in 3 tiers, one above to the other. Those who were too weak to climb up the upper bunks slept on the lowest level. The conditions were so filthy that the barracks were infected with parasites and lice. That became everyday occurrence, increasing constantly in number while hunger spread everywhere through the camp. The only and the often of the final word that many of those prisoners were still able to say was bread. The first investigation in Jasenovac's concentration camp was carried by the District Commission for the investigation of crimes committed by the occupiers and their collaborators in Nova Gradiška with the official record dated May 11, 1945. The second investigation was conducted by a special investigate commission of the Croatian-led Commission for the Investigation of Crimes, which traveled to Jasenovac with the official record date on the 18 May 1945. And in addition to the testimonies, I would also like to present the reports of this commission immediately after the closing the camp. During their retreat from Jasenovac's concentration camp at the end of April 1945, the Ustasha forces burned the otherwise destroyed most of the materials that could have provided statistical data necessary for determining the number of prisoners who perished at the Jasenovac. As a result, all registers, lists of the names, fields, records concerning the camp's economic operation and the official documents were destroyed. Only a small number of prisoners who had spent time in the camp were later released, while only a few hundred managed to escape in the final moments during the breakdown from the camp. The report described the conditions and evidence encouraged by the commissions upon entering the camp area. It was also published together with the two additional testimonies that are particularly significant for the research. Here is what the commission reports. This is a rather long document, and due to the limited time, I will not read the entire report. However, on the right side, for all of you who don't speak Serbo-Croatian, I have translated mostly of the report. What I would like to highlight is the following. The commission first arrived in the town of the Jasenovac, which has been almost completely devastated. There was hardly a single building that had not been severely damaged or entirely destroyed down its two foundations. As the commission established, the construction results from the demolition carried out by the Ustasha during their retreat. In addition, a large portion of the damage has been caused by deliberate arson committed by the Ustasha. The purpose of these destructions was to conceal the trace of crimes committed in the camp and to destroy the archives. In next two documents, I translated this conclusion of the commission. You can go to the next slide. But I wanted to show you at least some points of this. Those are some testimonies that can be added to the conclusion of commission. And here are what the witnesses' testimonies are. During my imprisonment, prisoners were not separated either by nationality or by political affiliation. This occurred only on occasionally when foreign commissions were expected to visit the camp, such as delegation of the International Committee of the Red Cross from Geneva. When that commission arrived, we were forbidden to speak to them in any way. At that time, we were marked with a special identification bands, regardless of nationality. I also know that the members of the commission asked whether there were any communists among the prisoners, and one Ustasha guard, says that the first inmate to encourage it, pinned a communist insignia on him and brought him before the commission. This is the essence all that I know about the horrors of the Jasenovac camp. I cannot state within certainty the total number of victims killed in Jasenovac, but I believe that the number may have reached as many as 1,500,000 people. It is impossible to establish the exact number because many people were liquidated immediately upon arrival within even being formally registered in the camp. The following day, we would only see their belongings and know that those prisoners had been killed immediately. Likewise, many were taken away for forced labor, where they were killed and never returned. Among those prisoners in the camp, there were Serbs, Croats, Jewish, Roma, Muslims, and Montenegrin. The another testimony also is giving some numbers and some their evidence of it. On the end of the conclusion, on the end of the testimony of this commission, it was written, on the basis of the evidence formally established in those records, the Investigate Commission concluded that during the final liquidation of the camp between 31st March and 24th April 1945, more than 3,000 remaining prisoners were violently and brutally murdered, with the exception of approximately 80 to 100 inmates who, on 22nd April, decided to rise and revolt and fight behavior on the struggle for life and death against the Ustasha guards, succeed in escaping from the hell. During this event, several hundred prisoners were cut down by machine gun fire from the bunkers. On the 21st April 1941, shortly before dusk, approximately 900 female prisoners and 50 to 60 children were taken to Gradina, where they were executed. When we speak about conclusions, or to what in turn are the statements submitted by the federal and state commissions for the investigation of crimes relevant and reliable, when the large body of collected testimonies relating to the Jasenovac concentration camp system is examined as a whole, together with the reports published by those commissions, a number of the questions emerge concerning of relevance and reliability of such statements. First, the commissions rushed to publish the results of their investigation and testimonies of the number of victims as quickly as possible, indicating a certain political and ideological instrumentalization of this information. Many potential witnesses has not even been interviewed prior on the publication of those statements, since they were far from the investigators' authorities, either in their homes or particularly in the case of men serving in the Yugoslav army. The witnesses were generally highly detailed and reliable in describing their arrival at the camp and the hardship of everyday life and survival, the violences they personally witnessed or heard about and executed that took place. Most of them described camp conditions in which they were aware of the presence of several thousand prisoners, most commonly between 2,000 and 6,000 inmates. Considerably less reliable, however, were the statements concerning the total number of victims. Numerous witnesses spoke of 500,000, 1 million, or even, as we heard, 1.5 million of victims, despite the fact that they had personally seen only 2,000 to 3,000 prisoners. Approximately 20 days after the prisoners' breakout, the Commission published their first reports, claiming between 500,000 and 600,000 victims, even though no mass exhumation had yet been carried out, or had there been sufficient opportunity for a comprehensive forensic or demographic investigation. It must also be taken into consideration that the witnesses were, in most cases, former inmates themselves, traumatized by their imprisonment in Jasenovac concentration camp system and overhead by an entirety understandable hatred toward the Ustaše regime and the independent state of Croatia. This may have contributed to the extremely high and unrealistic estimates for the number of victims, although the possibility cannot be excluded that such figures were suggested by commission investigators or by political and military authorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara. I will now ask my dear friend and colleague, Davor Stipic, to join us. Davor is a research associate of the Institute for Recent History of Serbia. He is one of the greatest experts among the younger Serbian historians on the memory and remembrance culture, Holocaust, Jewish studies, and among other things, he was awarded an annual prize of the Federation of Jewish Communities of Serbia for his doctoral dissertation about the Holocaust commemoration in the socialist Yugoslavia, which also includes an extensive part regarding Jasenovac's memorial institution. So Davor, take it away.
Good evening, everyone, or good morning. I know that we have people from... Uključen je zvučnik. Čujete sad? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah? Then it's maybe a problem with you. The rest can hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Perfect. Thanks a lot to Alexander. As he already said, my presentation, the main issue of my presentation will be the short post-war history of the space that during the World War II used to be the most notorious and the biggest death and concentration camp in this part of Europe. So I will focus on process of memorialization of this space after the war, also on the question of its symbolical meaning, as well as the ideological background of the monument that we have today. Just a moment, I have to share my presentation. Yeah. Can you see it? Yeah. As Tamara already mentioned, Jasenovac's concentration camp was liberated at the very end of the war on the 3rd of May, which means just 6 days before the official end of World War II in Europe. And at that moment, when partisan units arrived to Jasenovac, on the spot of the former camp stood nothing but the ruins. The great part of the camp has been already severely damaged during the Allied aerial bombardments in March and April of the same year. But the greatest part, not only of the camp, but also of Jasenovac's village, was destroyed during the last days of war before the members of Ustasha movement retreated toward the west. So everything that stayed from the former camp at the moment when partisan units arrived there were mostly some walls or fences of barbed wire that surrounded the camp, but almost all objects in the camp were either completely destroyed, either very heavily damaged. Unfortunately, this space stayed in such condition and mostly neglected for almost next 2 decades. And the only exceptions were those small wooden plaques that were installed immediately after the war. They marked the places of some mass graves in the camp and around it, as well as the places where the main objects of the camps used to stand. This, what you can see here on the right side, was actually the main and actually the only monument at the former camp all until the middle of 1960s. So as you can see, it was a quite moderate. It was just a small wooden plaque with an inscription. And in behind, you can see also another plaque with inscription Ciglana Crematori, which means that this monument stood at the center of the main camp in Jasenovac, so Ciglana camp. In this period, actually, there were a few personal initiatives to erect a monument to the victims. The most famous is the one proposed by a famous Croat sculptor Vanya Radauš from 1952. You can see it here. So he made this proposal, and as you can see, it consisted of this central part, which, according to his proposal, is supposed to be the building for the museum, and which was surrounded by mourning sculptures of mostly women, children, and elderly people. But the first official initiative for memorialization of this space has been launched by Subnor. So, sorry, not Subnor, but the local initiative committee in Jasenovac in 1952. So the same year when Vanya Radauš proposed this solution for the monument. But soon after, the Federation of the Union of War Veterans of Croatia and Federation of War Veterans of Yugoslavia took over this project because it was too important to be solved on the local level. So they wanted to make this a place, the common place of remembrance of all people and nationalities in Yugoslavia. So in 1960, they launched an official competition for the future monument, but this was a closed competition, which means that only the artists who had an invitation to take part in could submit their projects, and only two artists got an invitation, Bogdan Bogdanovic and Zdenko Kolacio. They submitted their sketches, so not the full projects, but only sketches of conceptual design. And after that, Bogdanovic's project has been chosen, so he started to develop it further for next 2 to 3 years. According to the sources, it's very likely that there was no official precise demand for the authors regarding the appearance of the future monument. So the monument that we have today in Jasenovac was mostly the result of a personal aesthetic, personal idea and vision of Bogdan Bogdanovic. Of course, not to be confusion, this idea has been approved by the highest level of authorities in Yugoslavia, I mean by President Tito personally, because Bogdan Bogdanovic had 2 presentations of his project in front of Tito, and according to Bogdanovic Remembrance, Tito's when he saw the project, he said, "It's very modern, but I like it." And Bogdanovic was deeply convinced that Tito's personal approval was the main reason why this project became, at the end, the final solution for the monument in Jasenovac. So this monument that we can see today, here we can also see 2 very important features of Bogdanovic aesthetics, 2 features that actually shape the final look of the monument. The first one is the usage of many very different and often universal human symbols on the monuments. So not only in monument in Jasenovac, it's very typical for all monuments made by Bogdan Bogdanovic. And Bogdanovic regarded the symbols featured in his monuments as something that offers a broad range of meanings, none of which he wanted to embrace as the one and absolute. Bogdanovic found the need to reduce the interpretation of symbols simply unacceptable. And he said it in one press interview, I quote, "It is a general disease of this era that we aspire to denote everything and reduce it to a single meaning. And yet everything has multiple meanings." End of quotation. So from the viewpoint of the author, there is no just one accurate and precise way to understand the meaning of the monument. The second typical trait of Bogdanovic's art, which is also apparent in this monument, was his refusal to depict the horrors of the war explicitly or realistically. So no dead bodies, no scenes of violence, sufferings, not even a scenes of struggle, no partisans, no victims, no perpetrators. And what is also interesting, there's no symbols of a communist party or partisan movement, and of course no symbols of nationalities that suffered in Jasenovac's concentration camps, such as Jews, Serbs, Romas. In fact, not only in Jasenovac, but actually throughout his entire opus, Bogdanovic was trying to translate historical facts into the language of universal science and architectural forms, which, as he often highlighted, for him was the only correct way of treating historical factuality. He also, this notion also reflects the most significant aspect of Bogdanovic's appearance in Yugoslav architecture. So from the outset of his career, his works represented the continuing clash with traditional memorial architecture, not only in Yugoslavia, as a totalitarian form of art. So because of that, he didn't want to promote a specific ideology or to impose some interpretations. He wanted to give liberty to viewers to understand the monument on their own way. So this was a kind of a personal Bogdanovic's battle that he would continue to wage for the rest of his life, and not only in his monument, but also in his public appearances, in his books, interviews, and so on. Here we can see a few of the sketches made by Bogdan Bogdanovic in period from 1960 to 1963. So we can see this development of his idea, the development of design of the final shape of the monument. And it's interesting that this monument became famous under the name a stone flower, although ironically, it was the first monument by Bogdan Bogdanovic that was not built of stone, but of concrete. As I already said, this one, as well as every other Bogdanovic monument, had multiple meanings and universal symbolism. The main focus of Bogdanovic's artistic vision was not the war, the crimes, the past, but the future of Yugoslav people, the future of Yugoslav state, and of course the peaceful coexistence among the Yugoslav nationalities. With this monument, Bogdanović actually wanted to, as he pointed out, to give, I quote, a talisman that will help all of us, Yugoslavs, to dispel demons of hatred and the phantoms of the past, and to grasp harmony and peaceful life together. End of quotation. That's why Bogdanović chose the flower of lotus as the central symbol of the monument. Lotus is the plants whose roots are located deep in the mud, while the flower develops on the surface of the water, facing the sun and the light. The symbolism was obvious. The lessons from the dark past should be the basis for the brighter future of Yugoslav people. At the same time, lotus flower was a symbol of life, and it has the roots in the underground world, but it is facing the sun as the symbol of freedom and of life. So he actually wanted to celebrate the life, the future, but unfortunately not the memory on death and destruction. As you can see here we can see actually the final result of his work. So here you can see that actually monument consists of two parts. The one is the flower, but the basis of the flower is this underground or semi-underground part. It is actually a crypt that also has its practical and its symbolical dimension. As a first, there is a connection with various ancient mythologies, biblical motifs, and so on. So underground crypt is in fact the symbol of cave. And cave is actually evocation of a few ancient and biblical episodes. For example, the miraculous birth of Abraham, or the cult of divinity, ancient divinity Mitra, or at the end, it's also the symbol of the Christ resurrection, because it also happened in a cave. During the warm summer days, the air inside the crypt would heat up, so the crypt would also remind on a hell on earth, which Jasenovac truly was in reality. The very existence of both the crypt and the flower actually contained a kind of symbolical duality, evoking the world of living and the world of dead. I believe that the biggest weakness of the monument and of the project is the fact that the monument does not have any inscription that can give some informations to the viewers or insight to the history of the camp and the genocide that happened there. Especially in the modern context. The only inscriptions are the verses of partisan poet Ivan Goran Kovačić, which are undoubtedly of the very high artistic value, but they give no answers, they give no informations, especially for some specific groups such as young people or the foreigners who visit the camp and who don't have any prior knowledge. For me, it's very interesting that the public response to Bogdanovic's project at that time was mainly negative. The first public presentation of the monument was in March of 1963 in Zagreb. It was actually an exhibition organized by the Museum of Revolution from Zagreb. And that exhibition actually was the presentation of the entire Bogdanovich project, of his ideas, of different solutions for the shape of the flower, and so on. And if we take a look to archive materials that include, for example, letters that visitors wrote to the Union of War Veterans, or reports from the exhibitions, as well as some extracts from the guest book, we can see what were the main objections. For example, the members of so-called Group 60, which was an informal group from Zagreb that gathered mostly young students of art history, applied arts, architecture, and so on. They visited the exhibition, and they wrote a letter to Union of War Veterans, in which they said, in which they wrote that this monument is actually, as they said, ugly and impossible to be understood for the ordinary people. They called the monument, I quote, a Disneyland, a playground for children and lazy citizens, the end of quotation. They even compare it to female genitals and Dalmatian cabbage. But above all, they criticized Bogdanovich for his abstract symbolic stylization, which leaves a lot of space for misinterpretations, because as written in objection, they said symbolism is justified only when it is understandable to everyone. Also there was many professional associations, such as Association of Fine Artists of Croatia, or Union of Association of Architects of Yugoslavia, Union of Students of Fine Arts, and so on, who complained not just because of the monument, its shape and symbolism, but also they complained about the competition, because they deeply believe that the competition for such an important place of remembrance supposed to be open, general, and even maybe international. So they mostly called for another project. As we can see from the results, none of those objections gave results. They were mostly all denied by Bogdanovich himself, and of course by the Union of War Veterans. So what was approved in first Belgrade and then Zagreb as the final solution for the monument is the same thing that was built at the spot. And the monument was finally open in 1966, and that is mostly the monument that we also have today. But it is interesting that from the very beginning, so from the beginning of the 1950s, there was one dominant idea of the authorities, of the Union of War Veterans, and so on. And it is that Jasenovac's supposed to become the place of education of the future generations. So the place that would be turned more toward the future than to the past. I mean, it is usual for the most number of big war memorials in socialist Yugoslavia, but Jasenovac was a really good example for that. And we can see it because from the very beginning of idea that Jasenovac should be turned into a memorial space, there was that idea that there should be erected not only a monument and museum. You can see here, this is a sketch made not by Bogdan Bogdanovic. It was made by the architects from Zagreb. So this is basically the project for the memorial museum. But idea was also to build the elementary school, which was also built next to the monument, so that educational part of the entire memorial was, I would say, the main leading idea that shaped the look of the memorial during the socialist period. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Davor. As always, it's exceptionally well presented. And I will now like to introduce another dear colleague and friend of mine, Dr. Miran Gulic, who is a principal research fellow of the Institute for Contemporary History in Belgrade. He is one of the most productive Serbian historians who, among other topics, extensively covers the Second World War, especially the horrors and atrocities in the NDH, but also the wars of the 1990s. And has recently published a very voluminous synthetic book about the history of Yugoslavia, the first comprehensive overview of Yugoslav history from the beginning until the dissolution of the final form of Yugoslavia in 2006, and also written by a Serbian author and published in Serbia. Milan, we are glad to have you with us, and please take it away.
Thank you, Alexander. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure today that we remember the victims of Ustaša genocide, and I would like to thank to you, Alexander, and to Mr. Litucci for the invitation and for the trust. So, can I go now? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yes, can hear you.
The geographical area of Herzegovina today belongs to the state of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and it is administratively divided between its two entities. The eastern parts belong, just a moment, I would like to show you a map. No. Okay. So the yellow is Herzegovina. The eastern part belonged to the Republic of Srpska, and the western parts to the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. At the time when the fire of World War II reached the Balkans, Herzegovina was within the framework of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, the largest part as part of the Zeta Banovina and the smaller part as a part of the Primorje Banovina, if we look at the administrative organization of that state. On the eve of World War II, the territory of Herzegovina was inhabited by a mixture of Serbs, Croats, and Muslims, today known as Bosniaks. Among the approximately 320,000 inhabitants, according to the 1931 census, the largest number were Croats, 46%, followed by Serbs, 31%, and Muslims 23%. When the Yugoslav kingdom was attacked on 6th April 1941, pro-Ustasha and anti-Yugoslav elements in Herzegovina removed hidden weapons or deserted from the army, and in the areas of Široki Brijeg, Ljubuški, Čapljina, Stolac, and Mostar, they looted military warehouses, trade and craft shops owned by Serbs, cut telephone and telegraph lines, attacked trains on the Mostar-Dubrovnik railway, and disarmed small groups of Yugoslav soldiers. In addition, in the years preceding the attack on Yugoslavia, thanks to the high degree of autonomy enjoyed by Banovina of Croatia, in the parts of Herzegovina that had entered its borders, a large number of anti-Yugoslav and pro-Ustasha elements were found in leadership positions in the military, police, and civil service. In view of this, the main city center of Herzegovina, Mostar, in the premises of the local administration headquarters, a group of Croats, led by the city's police chief, took the Ustasha oath of allegiance to the leader of the Free State of Croatia, Ante Pavelić, and to the homeland, the Free State of Croatia within its historical borders. The next day, April 10th, leaflets were printed in the printing house of the Franciscan monastery, informing the citizens that the independent state of Croatia had been proclaimed in Zagreb. It was also announced that the Ustasha city guard had been formed, and the population was called upon to maintain peace and order and submit to the new Ustasha authorities. The proclamation of the independent state of Croatia and the general situation on the Yugoslav front led to the complete collapse of the Yugoslav army in the territory of Herzegovina. So pro-Ustasha oriented officers, non-commissioned officers, and soldiers disarmed the remnants of the Yugoslav army and took over the military infrastructure. The last remnants of the Yugoslav army began to leave Herzegovina on April 16. And on the same day, in the evening hours, Italian occupation troops arrived, the Littorio division from the Motor Transport Army Corps. At dawn on April 17, when Yugoslav armed forces formally ceased resistance, German occupation troops, the 14th Armored Division, also arrived in Herzegovina from the direction of Sarajevo. The occupier was welcomed joyfully by the local, mostly Croatian population, with waving hands and throwing flowers. In the first days of the occupation and before the Allied agreement on the division of the occupied Yugoslav territory was reached, Italian troops were stationed in Herzegovina. Germany and Italy divided the occupied Yugoslav territory in Vienna on 21st and 22nd April, but the issue of the Italian-Croatian demarcation remained open until an official agreement was reached between Rome and Zagreb. However, even before that agreement was reached, the Croatian authorities indicated which areas they claimed by appointing chieftains commissioners for certain regions. Thus, the area of Herzegovina was under the jurisdiction of two commissioners, one sent to Mostar, while the other was in charge of Eastern Herzegovina. Their task was to build an Ustasha organization in the assigned area and to tie those areas as tightly as possible to the state center. Herzegovina would become part of the independent state of Croatia was determined by the Italian-Croatian demarcation agreement signed in Rome on 18th May. True, part of Herzegovina fell within the second and part within the third zone of Italian influence, but Croatian government was able to establish and function to its fully extent, except for certain restrictions regarding military organization. The day after the agreement was reached in the Italian capital, the command of the Italian army informed the units in field that as of 20 May, civil administration over the territories assigned to Croatia, which had until then been under Italian occupation, would pass into the hands of the Croatian authorities. Starting from that day, the Italian forces in that area lost the significance and the rights of occupation forces and gained the significance of troops stationed on the territory of the friendly and allied independent state of Croatia. Thanks to this development of events, in the last days of May 1941, the authority of the independent state of Croatia was established in the whole of Herzegovina. In addition to the previously established civil authorities, the police, the gendarmerie, and the Home Guard army took over their responsibilities. Administratively, the territory of Herzegovina in the independent state of Croatia was divided between two great counties. Just a moment. The great county of Dubrava, with its seat in Dubrovnik, included the areas of Trebinje, Bileća, Gacko, Ljubinje, and Stolac, and the great county of Hum, with its seat in Mostar, included the areas of Nevesinje, Konjic, Ljubuški, and Mostar. Taking into account the administrative division of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, only the area of Prozor belonged to the great county of Pliva and Drama, with its seat in Jajce. By the time the independent state of Croatia was established in Herzegovina, the repressive, or rather criminal character of Ustasha authorities had already become very evident. Discriminatory laws had already been adopted, which, among other things, prohibited the use of Cyrillic script and imposed a permanent state of emergency in the country. The first camps, Danica and Kerestinec, were opened, and the first mass massacres were committed, such as those in Gudovac, near Bjelovar, Blagaj, near Slunj, Prekopa, near Glina, and Polača, near Knin. Such a policy of Ustasha authorities from the end of May 1941 could have been extended to Herzegovina, and it obviously was. The Ustasha authorities were established in Mostar as the center of all of Herzegovina on May 28, and the next day a conference of Ustasha commissioners was held in the Franciscan monastery, at which it was agreed to take action against the Serbian and Jewish population, and a fundamental plan was drawn up for the destruction of the Serbs of Herzegovina. The meeting was attended by key figures in the Ustasha apparatus from all over Herzegovina, as well as representatives of the central authorities from Zagreb. It was agreed that the leader of the activities directed against the Serbs in Herzegovina would be Ivo Herencic, an old Ustasha emigre, and later a general and one of the highest ranking officers of the Croatian armed force in the days of the collapse of the independent state of Croatia. The implementation of the agreement began as soon as possible. Already on the night between May 31 and June the 1st, 5 prominent Serbs were taken from their homes in Mostar, including the prominent surgeon and director of the regional hospital, Fedor Lukac. During the arrest of one of them, his daughter was raped. The arrested Mostar Serbs were taken to the banks of the Neretva River and killed there, with the exception of Dr. Lukács, who managed to save himself by jumping into the water. When New Day started, June the 1st, a campaign of simultaneous mass arrests of Serbs began in the areas of Trebinje, Gacko, Nevesinje, Stolac, and Ljubinje. Croatian authorities were established in Nevesinje between May 27 and 29, and already on June the 1st, in just a few hours, about 60 Serbs were arrested. The next day, on June the 2nd, the first mass crime in Eastern Herzegovina was committed in the village of Udrežnje, near Nevesinje. A group of about 80 Ustašas stormed the village and killed 27 Serbs, and the fear that something like that would happen again in other villages in the Nevesinje region led to the outbreak of June uprising in Herzegovina. In the village of Korita, near Bileća, on June the 2nd, all Serbs were invited to come to a designated place to be explained the procedure for crossing the Croatian-Montenegrin border, given that the village was in a border area. However, all villagers who responded to the invitation were captured and detained in Sokolski Dom building and the elementary school. They were held there for 3 days, after which they began to be abused and taken to a nearby pit on the Kobilja Glava Pass. The captured Serbian peasants were killed with blunt objects or firearms and then thrown into the after-mentioned pit. 134 murdered Serbs were thrown into Korička Jama, or pit of Korita, on June 4th and 5th of 1941, and the action was led by Ustaša, commissioner for the Gacko district, Herman Togonal, so-called Krešo. While the killings in Korita were ongoing, on June 4th, the Ustaša authorities launched a simultaneous campaign to arrest Serbs in several villages in the Ljubinje area. The campaign of arrests was completed by June 8, when about 200 arrested Serb men were brought to an improvised camp in village Rankovci. The arrested Serbs were then taken to a pit in the village of Kapavica, when about 110 Serbs from the Ljubinje area were killed during the night between June 8 and 9. The first group of those killed were thrown into the pit, but some of the corpses got stuck in its narrow opening, which caused confusion among the Ustaša and allowed some of arrested to escape. The remaining detainees were killed around the pit, where their bodies were left lying. Shortly thereafter, on the night of June 13th and 14th, another 70 to 80 arrested Serbs were taken from Ljubinje, who were also killed, and their bodies were thrown into Pandurica pit. Mass crimes against Serbs in Herzegovina intensified around St. Vitus Day, or Vidovdan, a significant holiday for Serbian national identity and tradition, approached. As a kind of announcement, we will cite an order issued by the Ustaša authorities, which was drawn up according to the Nazi model. 1. More than 2 Serbs are not allowed to move around the city together or hang out. 2. Jews and Serbs are not allowed to walk together or hang out at all. 3. After 8 o'clock in the evening, Serbs and Jews must be in their homes. 4. Jews and Serbs must wait in stores for Croats to satisfy their needs and then shop. And 5. Serbs and Jews are not allowed to go to the promenade or sit on the Freedom Square. In the Popovo Polje area in Herzegovina, from June 23 to 25, the Ustašas from Ljubinje arrested 168 Serbs from 5 villages in that microregion. They were first imprisoned in a school and then taken to the Ržani Do, where they were killed and thrown into the pit. On June 26, another 36 killed Serbs was killed from 4 villages around Ljubinje, were thrown into the same pit. The killings of Serbs in the Stolac area began on June 24, when around 120 Serbs were killed around Berkovići, among whom were women and children. On the night between June 25 and 26, 283 arrested Serbs were taken from Stolac. They were killed on the banks of the Neretva River in Opuzan for Serbian and Chetnik action in the Stolac district, as stated in the report of the Gendarmerie station in Opuzan. On June 26, about 70 Serbs from the village of Dabrice near Stolac were captured and detained in a school, from where they were taken in small groups to various locations and killed over the next 2 days. On the same day, 85 Serbs from the village of Triebanj were arrested, who were first detained in the warehouse of the tobacco station and the next day killed in several different locations. The majority of about 60 Serbs from the village of Triebanj were taken to a pit on Bivolje Brdo and killed there. On the eve of Vidovdan, on June 27, adult men of Serbian nationality from the village of Gornje Hrasno responded to the authorities' call and were detained in an elementary school. They were told that they would be sent to Stolac as hostages until the uprising in Nevesinje area ended. However, they were taken to the Gavranica pit, where 66 Serbs from the village of Gornje Hrasno were killed and thrown into the pit. On June 26, 1941, the Ustaša chief of staff in Mostar, Ivan Zovko, ordered that from that moment, Serbs and Jews are not allowed to move around the streets or go out until further orders. This order was the prelude to the mass arrests of Mostar Serbs that were carried out on the eve of Vidovdan from June 26 to 28, when around 450 Mostar Serbs were arrested. What this looked like was testified by Danilo Bilanovic, a member of the League of Communist Youth of Yugoslavia and influential figure in the communist regime after the war. He said, mass arrests of Serbs began on June 26, 1941 and continued in July. The Ustašas were in civilian clothes, only they had a cap with the sign U on their heads. They went from house to house and bought up all the males over 15 years of age and who looked to be over 15. After the 3 days arrest campaign was over, a night followed during which the arrested Serbs were killed at various locations in the city, thrown into Neretva River or into pits. Some of the arrested were taken in trucks to Čitluk, Ljubuški, and Široki Brijeg, where the executions were carried out. During those days, mass crimes were committed against Serbs in several villages around Mostar, and the entire brotherhood of the ancient monastery of Žitomislić was killed. On the night between June 30 and July 1st, 1941, Serbs were killed in Čapljina area. Between 85 and 90 Serbs arrested in that area were killed not far from the Franciscan monastery of Humac in Ljubuški. Given that these massacres had provoked a mass uprising, the central authorities tried to calm the situation by sending a special mission of General Vladimir Laksa, who had the authority of the Poglavnik's special plenipotentiary for the large counties of Hum and Dubrava. He eloquently explained the situation in Herzegovina in the first weeks of Ustasha rule. He said, "During the Ustasha regime, not a single official, not a single officer, not a single citizen, not a single woman or child was safe for their life day or night. These Ustasha ravaged wherever they entered. Many of these Ustasha men boasted about how many people they had killed, how many people they had beaten and abused to death. Men and women were dragged off to prison without choice, without even the slightest offense being proven against them. However, a new wave of repression against Serbs in Mostar began with the arrival of Ustasha captain Ivo Herencic in the first days after the uprising was suppressed. Friar Tugomir Soldo, a loyal member of Roman Catholic clergy, who was decorated in the independent state of Croatia, believed that all the massacres in Herzegovina were directed by Herencic and that all this work was directed by Dido Kvaternik, according to Pavelić's secret instructions. Given that Ante Pavelić, with the title of Poglavnik, stood at the head of the independent state of Croatia, in which a totalitarian political system was established, and that Eugen Dido Kvaternik stood at the head of police, repressive apparatus, then it becomes clear that this was a state-planned crime. According to the order of Ustasha police from Zagreb, given to the great county of Hum in Mostar on July 19, 1941, financially and intellectually stronger Serbs were to be sent gradually every day to the Gospić concentration camp, and that action was to be approached tactfully and decently. In accordance with this order, 3 transports of Mostar Serbs were sent by rail from Mostar to Gospić, July 20, July 22nd, and July 24th. Along the way, they were not given not a morsel of food or a drop of water, as Hakija Dugalić testified, and when we got off the train, the Ustasha beat us with rifle butts and legs, as Ivo Ćorić testified. Most of Serbs from Mostar who were sent to the Gospić concentration camp in these 3 transports were killed there. In the last days of July and the first days of August 1941, groups of Ustasha raided several villages around Mostar, where they carried out massacre and mass arrests, after which all traces of the arrested Serbs were lost. In the village Bačevići, on the night between 24th and 25 July, 18 Serbs were arrested, whose further fate is unknown. In the village of Zemlje, 38 Serbs were arrested, who were taken to Mostar, imprisoned there, then tortured, and finally killed. On St. Elijah Day, Ilindan, on 2nd August, 11 Serbs were captured in Goranci and taken to Mostar, where all traces of them were lost. The fate of 18 Serbs from the village of Podgorani, who were captured on 3rd August, was identical. And same thing happened with 28 Serbs from the village of Malo Polje, who were captured on the night between 4th and 5th August. These terrible days for Herzegovina was perhaps best described by the Bishop of Mostar and Duvno, Alojzije Mišić in the letter to the Zagreb Archbishop Alojzije Stepinac. He said, people were being caught like beasts. They were slaughtered, killed, and thrown alive into abyss. Woman, mother with children, adult girls, female and male children were thrown into pits. One of the greatest individual crimes against Serbs in the independent state of Croatia occurred in the village of Prebilovci near Čapljina. On August 4, 1941, a group of Ustašas, led by an Ustaša leader from Čapljina, Andrija Buljan, surrounded the village, which had no men of military age and who, fearing that what was happening to their compatriots in Herzegovina would happen to them, took refuge in the hills. The village was left with the elderly, women and children who believed that they would not be targeted by any armed formation, and 16 men who were guards and who were killed as soon as the Ustašas entered the village. All the Serbs found in village were captured and detained in the school building with the promise that they would be transported to Serbia. However, the mistreatment and rape of women began already in the school. The arrested Serbs of village of Prebilovci were then imprisoned in a grain silo in the village of Tasovčići, and on August 5th, they were transferred in a cattle wagons to the nearby village of Šurmanci. On August 6th at 7:30, the killing of Serbs from Prebilovci began, and their bodies were thrown into Golubinka pit. The killing lasted a full 6 hours, and by 1:30 p.m., about 470 Serbs from Prebilovci, including a large number of children, had been thrown into the pit. Mehmed Tikveš and Danilo Zubac testified, "We saw an Ustaša take a child and throw him into the air like a ball with loud laughter. The child's red dress fluttered before the abyss swallowed him." The surviving villagers, Serbs from Prebilovci, were killed in the following days. So by the end of August 1941, a total of 809 Serbs from Prebilovci had died, and whom 298 were children aged from a few months to 14 years, and 54 families were completely destroyed. Only 168 Serbs from Prebilovci survived the war, which is why the village is considered one of the symbols of the suffering of Serbs in independent state of Croatia, and of the suffering of Serbs in general during the occupation in World War II. The extent of the policy of extermination of Serbs in Herzegovina was evident in August 1941 in Mostar, when a mass forced deportation was launched. At that time, Serbs were summoned to report to the train station at a specific time, according to the first letter of their surname. They were allowed to take very little luggage with them, and they left the keys to the immovable property with the Ustaša authorities. Behind the summonses, which contained 2 or more letters, was the signature of the head of Mostar police, Krešimir Krtalić. The first such transport was organized on August 14, and those who were squeezed into were told they would be deported to Serbia. The second transport left on August 15, and the third transport that had been prepared was stopped by Italians on August 17. Since the Italian occupation troops took control of the second zone by 7th September 1941, and during October of the same year over the third zone, all irregular and regular Ustasha armed formations had to withdraw from that area, while all units of Croatian Home Guard, Army, and the Croatian Gendarmerie, Oružništvo, in that area were transferred under Italian command. Such a development of events suspended Croatian authority over a wide area, including almost all of Herzegovina, making further repression and murder of Serbs impossible. However, after the Ustasha formations withdrew from the after-mentioned areas, the repressive policy continued in the rest of the territory controlled by the independent state of Croatia, including a small part of Herzegovina. Thus, on Christmas Day, January 7th, 1942, the entire population of the village of Pridvorica, between Gacko and Kalinovic, was massacred, when around 180 Serbs were killed. The withdrawal of Ustasha formations and cessation of massacre under Italian rule also enabled the consolidation of the forces of the resistance movement, both communist and royalist. Both did a lot to save the civilian populations in the area where they established control. Thanks to this, even after the capitulation of Italy and the return of Ustasha authorities, the repression that existed in summer of 1941 could not return. However, larger scale crimes occurred sporadically. Thus, on September 30, 1944, a group of Ustasha, led by Ustasha leader in Mostar, Hamo Hadžić, surrounded the Mostar village of Lakševine and Dortiješ. They arrested 39 Serbs and informed them that they would be sent to forced labor. Instead, they were all taken to the banks of Neretva River and killed there, and their bodies were thrown into the river. The last major Ustasha massacre of Serbs in Herzegovina was carried out on Roman Catholic Christmas Eve, December 24, 1944, when a group of Ustasha raided the village of Raštane near Mostar. 22 people of Serbian nationality were killed, including 9 women and 13 children. That same night, a group of Ustasha raided the nearby village of Raška Gora and killed all the villagers they encountered on the roads, in yards, and in houses. 76 Serbs residents were killed, and all with the surname Janić. And among them were 10 men, 34 women, and 32 children, including babies a few weeks old. 57 houses were burned, and 27 villagers burned to death in one of the burned barns. The testimony of that event is very important. Terrible cries were heard from the burning barn. The Ustasha stood gathered around it until the burning roof collapsed, and then they left the village. The massacre in Raška Gora occurred at the time when parts of Herzegovina had already been liberated. In September 1944, freedom came to Gacko and Bileća. In October 1944 to Trebinje, Stolac, Čapljina, and Ljubuški. After massive operations in early 1945, in the last days of January and in first half of February, Široki Brijeg, Nevesinje, and Mostar were liberated. When the occupying troops were thrown back across Ivan Sedlo in early March 1945, the whole of Herzegovina was liberated. According to the only Yugoslav census of war victims, whose data we can take with extreme caution and as an illustration, 70 1,600 people died in territory of Herzegovina during the World War II, among whom the majority were Serbs. 11,700, 66%. Therefore, the share of Serbs in the victims in Herzegovina was 2/3, although they had a share of barely 1/3 in the total population. And this number, taken with caution and as an illustration, speaks volumes about the extent of the suffering of Serbs in Herzegovina during independent state of Croatia, and primarily due to its policy of genocide, the total destruction of Serbian people in the wine area it covered from 1941 till 1945. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Milan. As always, very informative, very precise. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you had a chance to hear all of our presentations we planned for today or for this evening, because in Serbia it's already 8:30. We are here, all the presenters, for your questions and comments. If you have any, please just raise your hand or introduce yourself, or maybe if you are shy, you can write in chat and our moderators will take a look.
I would like to, since I raised my hand first, well, Milan's presentation was devastating and overwhelming, actually, to hear. But I actually wanted to go back to Davor's presentation because I was very interested about the flower statue and how, and it seemed. I'll ask Davor if you've ever compared this to how Jewish sculptors depicted the Holocaust in the same time period, like the 1950s and 1960s, because the overwhelming nature of that commemorative art was also highly abstract. If you look at Jewish sculpture from the 50s and 60s and even into the 70s, I mean, this was sort of the high point of abstract expressionism and abstract art in general. I just was wondering if you were familiar with that, and also if you knew, I have two more parts to this question for you. Are you familiar with Sam Gruber, who oversees an international commission on Holocaust sculpture from World War II? And also if you have some thoughts about Nandor Glied's work, but I'll let you answer, Davor.
Regarding the Jewish sculptures of that time, it is, I believe, quite individual because we have some of them who opposed the very idea that the remembrance on the war crimes and suffering could be depicted in an abstract way. One of them was one of the most famous sculptors of that time, Nathan Rappaport, who made, for example, the monument in Warsaw Ghetto to the uprising in Warsaw Ghetto, and he even said, he asked, actually, it was like the rhetorical question, if I make a stone with a hole and I say this is the monument to the victims, could it be really the monument to the victims? So he wanted to say that some things as suffering and war crimes, which are quite realistic things. So as one of the victims said, we were not suffering abstractly. Our suffering was quite realistic. So we need realistic monuments. But it is always a question to whom the monument is not dedicated, but who is that group to whom we want to send a message. Are those the people who survived? Because usually the people who survived are asking for something more realistic. Not only when we are speaking about World War II, we have also the same issues about, for example, the wars of 1980s, or we are building the monuments for the future generations to explain them some things, to impose some ideas, some such as freedom, the importance of the fighting for the freedom, and is it just the role of the monument to commemorate the victims, or it also has this educational role? And I think that especially from the beginning of the 1960s, this educational role of the Holocaust monuments, of generally the monuments dedicated to civil victims in Europe, became much more visible, much more important, because those new generations that did not have any personal experience with the war actually became grown people at the beginning of the 60s. So that's why the monument at the beginning of the 60s were much more dedicated to the new generation, and that's why they also became a bit more abstract. But when we are speaking about Bogdanovich, there's another important reason for the abstraction, not only in Jasenovac, but in general in his monuments. We must have in mind that with Bogdan Bogdanovich and his monument dedicated to the Jewish victims of Nazism here in Sephardic cemetery in Zagreb, in Belgrade, that monument was actually one of the monuments that marked the split with the Soviet role models of the realism in depicting not only the victims, but also the struggle. And actually, Bogdanovich was one of those artists who started to create this new art in socialist Yugoslavia that later became known as the socialist modernism. And one of main aims of that art was actually to oppose the realistic and in some way totalitarian practice from the Soviet Union. What was?
I was also going to ask you about the about Nander Glede and what their relationship might have been.
Relationship between Bogdanovich and Glede.
Yeah.
Actually, as far as I know, there's not so many relations between Glede and Bogdanovich. Glede experienced the Holocaust personally, so his parents were killed in a Holocaust. A lot of his friends were killed in Subotica, so he dedicated to them monument, a ballad to the hanged in Subotica. So he that is difference comparing to Bogdanovich. He had a personal experience, and he also had that strong influence of reborn identity, in this case Jewish identity, that was reborn under the influence of the war trauma. So if you look to his monuments, many of them depict much more realistically, but in artistically very unique way, not only the people who suffered, but also the Jewish tradition, or something that can show to the viewer to whom the monument is dedicated without reading some inscription or knowing the broader context. But to be honest, I don't see, and I have never heard about any influence of Bogdanovich to the bleed or the opposite. And I even don't know about any personal relations between Bogdanovich and bleed.
I don't want to take up any more time. I'll put you in touch with Sam Gruber, who is involved in this kind of international organization for memorial study.
I will be glad.
Yes. Norman, go ahead. Why don't you ask your question, Norman?
Okay. First, a comment, the comment being that the most important point that I got from this whole meeting, and the point that we should put forward in the strongest way possible, is the extent of the genocide, the numbers of the genocide, because the denial or the trivialization of those numbers has been perhaps one of the most destructive things we faced. And here, this conference in great detail has shown the extent very specifically, and this we should put forward when we send out the recording. The second point deals with art. Not that I know that much about art, but social realist art dealing with the fight against fascism and the genocidal aspects of fascist states and Japanese imperialism, for that matter. Social realist art in China, in the Soviet Union, in Europe generally. It seems to me this should be looked at because a lot of it is quite powerful. It shows the atrocities, but it also shows the resistance. Paintings of children being shot while in the background resistance and opposition, fighting back takes place. That would be the second point. The third point that I'd make, and this might be a little bit off, I've written about this as a historian. The continued use of the term totalitarian cannot be separated from the Cold War context in which it came into existence. There is a good deal of scholarship that developed, particularly at the end of the 20th century, denying any relevant meaning to that term, except as a propaganda term. There are dictatorships of all kinds, class-based dictatorships of all kinds. Nazi Germany was not a total state in that powerful corporations and other groups retained a good deal of independent power. The Soviet Union, in reality, was not a totalitarian state. So the use of this term is for us self-defeating because it strengthens Cold War ideology, which has been an essential part of permitting the restoration of reactionary and fascist states. Even today, the term totalitarian is being replaced by authoritarian in popular discourse and media discourse. Okay.
Thank you, Norman.
Okay.
Would the presenters like to comment on that, or should we proceed to the next question?
Maybe we can proceed.
Okay. John, I think you're the next person with their hand up. Does everybody know how to use the voting mechanism on Zoom? You just go to react and you press the hand. So just so everyone knows. Okay, John, you're next.
I'm trying to lower it.
Oh, John, you have to unmute yourself. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay,
Great to see you.
Go ahead.
Norman said, good to see you.
Good to see you, Norm. Actually, I don't know if I saw you. I didn't see your camera on. But there are a couple of minor points that I wanted to mention. Then I've got a question for each of the presenters. The same question that I'd like to hear what each of the presenters think might be a proper response. First of all, I've always hated that flower monument built out in the field in Croatia near the Jasenovac site, because I think its ambiguity and its non-specific nature. Actually, a person driving by can say, wow, isn't that a beautiful flower? It doesn't convey the message that it should be associated with the slaughter of genocide. It doesn't convey who the victims are. It doesn't convey any of the rationale used to conduct the genocide. And to me, the use of abstract art in the absence of defining information associated with the art is a passive way of hiding the genocide. And I think that falls in line with the post-World War II regime's efforts to create bratstvo i jedinstvo, brotherhood and unity, and therefore it's inconvenient for that political objective to focus on the realism of what happened. And thus, one of the presenters talked about the instrumentalization of the history, and I think that this was an example of the post-World War II regime's instrumentalization of the monument to play down the terror and the horror of the events. But leaving that aside,
do you want Davor to comment on that?
Talk about the word. I'm going to come up to the question here. All the presenters. Let's just, I don't want to get into too much of a debate about modern art and abstract art, but my impression has always been more than 100 members of my family are among the dead of Jasenovac, and that monument to me does nothing for us, zero, except to make a beautiful picture of a horrendous reality. The other phrase that I caught upon by one of the presenters is how various quote unquote nationalists and political elements have attempted to instrumentalize the commemoration or their memory of this Holocaust. And it almost sounded as if the nationalists and the politicos are more evil than the ones who perpetrated the Holocaust, because by playing it up and justifying it as reason for separating with Republika Srpska, for example, or a reason for not having good relations with Croatia, appears to be, to me, a trivial byproduct of an effort to commemorate and to mark the horrors of a genocide. So I would always say that it's more important that the nationalists or the politicos inadequately presented the history than to criticize them for their effort as if making the effort was evil. Now my question to all of the presenters is this. You presented information here that our opponents, the genocide deniers among the Croats, among the Germans, will all say, well, yeah, 99 people were killed in some village and 200 people were killed in another village, but that's nothing. We're compared to the history of millions of people killed elsewhere. You're all crying over spilled milk. And therefore, I think that our focus has to be to make the move from the detailed itemization of known accounts, which are probably 1% at most of the killings. There are many cases in which there are no witnesses, everybody was killed. What, if anything, should be done? Lenin used to say, what is to be done? My question is anything to be done? Because I'm getting tired of asking what is to be done. I think that the teaching of the genocide has to be mandatory in all schools in Serbia. And it needs to be a mandatory condition for any diplomatic ties between Serbia and Croatia. In other words, if the Holocaust in Croatia is not taught by high school as a mandatory course, we should have no diplomatic relations with Croatia, just as we had no diplomatic relations with NDH, so-called independent state of Croatia, because it's an enemy force with which there are no diplomatic relations. So you who have dug up these, literally dug up these hidden details and told them to us here today, are perhaps among the best qualified people to say, how can we instrumentalize, because I'm a politically oriented nationalist, sorry to tell you, I want to instrumentalize these facts in a manner that will change the mentality of the continuing genocidal nature of many of the people in Croatia today, the same people who drove us out in Oluja and conducted the completion of the genocide, which is not possible to be separated from the World War II genocide. So what is to be done specifically to get this message into the common everyday understanding of the people of both the people of Serbia, then the people of Croatia, and then the entire EU, which by subsuming Croatia as a vassal state without punishment has become a collaborator in the suppression of genocide history. Okay, that's to each of the presenters. What is to be done specifically to make sure that there's no one in Europe that does not know about the 7th death camp? And that's probably about 95% of the people of Europe.
Go ahead, Sasha. You want to answer, or Tamara?
Well,
Unmute.
it's like the question is for all of us. Maybe Milan, as someone who was a refugee from Croatia in the 1990s, would also have a particular personal perception of the thing. But honestly, I don't know what is to be done. I have a different perspective. John's perspective is quite legit. What I'm more concerned about is actually determining as much actual victims as possible, honoring them in a proper way, not to make them some statistics, some numbers, potatoes, not to make them an instrument of political fight with radicals in Croatia, because they don't want to listen. Even if we have all the proofs, all the evidences and everything, they are in a position they don't need to listen anymore. We have a similar situation regarding the EU context, regarding the Macedonia, Republic of North Macedonia and Bulgaria. Bulgaria is now blackmailing Macedonia by interpretation of Macedonian history. It's just a power play of politics where I, as a scholar, don't fit really. It's out of my league. But what I think is important is to address the victims, survivors, the descendants, honor the victims as much as possible. I very much liked Milan's presentation, who is in many details, because 50 or 60 dead in some village, which has population of, let's say, 100. It's a half of population. It's like killing 5 million people in New York. You just need to put it in a certain perspective. For me, like, if we take the lowest possible count for Jasenovac, which is 83,400 people, that's 25 of Belgrade population at the time, because Belgrade used to have 250,000 population at the time of the Second World War. So we are talking about huge numbers, huge portions. Like if you take the Holocaust in Serbia, 12,000 Jews were killed. That doesn't sound too much, but that's 90% of all the Serbian Jews. If you put it in a certain perspective, then it looks a bit better. What I disliked about the political instrumentalizations is, for example, if of course, when the Yugoslavia started dissolving, both the Croatian Serbs and Bosnian Serbs, and especially Bosnian Serbs, had all the rights to arm themselves and defend themselves, to protect themselves from something similar happening like in the NDH. But perpetrating a war crime and say we did this because, this will prevent the another genocide happening, it doesn't fit. I think that the problems for Serbian people, and I say this as a devoted Orthodox Christian and quite a patriotic Serb myself, is when we started doing the same things our enemies have done to us during the past. And from that moment on, historically, we are in a decline for decades already. This is my perception, but once again, maybe Milan, who lived in Croatia, who had to flee the country, start entirely new life, and who hasn't severed the ties with his town of birth and the place where his family lived for generations, maybe he will have a different, more informative perspective than I have.
Maybe Milan wants to say something.
I will be pretty short in my answer. I completely understand John's question, and I agree with a huge part of what he said. But I am not quite sure that I know the answer on the question what can be done. On the scientists, on the historians, is to try to determine what happened to us in past. Because without that we can't do anything, and that's important because we don't know a lot of that what's happened in past. We have holes in our knowledge, and people don't even know what has already been answered or determined. We have to strengthen our collective consciousness, and rest of all is in the hands of politicians, and I can't say anything more.
Tamara, would you like to say something?
Sorry, yes. Well, I'm trying to look from my perspective what I can do like an individual for those people. And for now, I only can see the way in researching, publishing, and speaking about those people, because every victim has his name. Every woman has a name. We know the name of the villages. Thinking about what would be in those places if those people survived. How many families, unfortunately, haven't been born because they have been killed. And working with the children last couple of months, I realized that the kids, not only in the primary school, even in the high school in Serbia, doesn't know the term anti-Semitism. For me, that was terrible, but in the same time, I think that it's not so bad, because that means that those children don't know the bad side from anti-Semitism, and learning them from the beginning to the end the right way of anti-Semitism was and what concentration camp were. We are on the good way. We have some generations now that they have been born in this century, so they don't know, they haven't been part of none of the wars that we were. I was born 1991, and I cannot, of course, I don't remember the war of beginning of 90s, but I remember the war of 1999, and etc., etc. So the kids from this center, they mostly don't know even their local history. So perspective of forgetting the Holocaust and genocide generally, I think that is very far from them. Closing them with some local stories that can be short begun, and also closing them with some everyday life which haven't been only connected with the genocide completely. That is something that is taking their attention. And when starting with it, we can take them to more. For example, we organize some workshop in the schools. Last week I was in the first grade, and working with them with everyday life in the time of genocide was interesting because I realized that it was interesting for me because I realized that they even know the years of the Second World War. So speaking with some from some good perspective about what Second World War, for meaning that those people have their everyday life before the genocide started, that can be some idea how to take their attention. I'm completely with those stories that we can do what we like individuals can do. We cannot think about the huge perspective of the country or politicals or etc.
Davor?
Yeah, just a short answer to John's question. Well, I agree with John that the flower in Jasenovac could be maybe problematic because, as John said, I agree, it does not convey many things. And the most important is that it does not convey any knowledge about the genocide and the crimes committed there. And if you leave the context, if you don't have any prior knowledge, then that monument could be literally monument to anything or anyone, maybe even monument to some killed Ustashas if you change the context of it. But we can provide the context through the education, and I think that's the main answer on John's question: education and just education. But he said one thing that I don't like to use and I don't agree with. He said how we can instrumentalize our knowledge or the facts. That is one very important fact about the education about Holocaust and genocide and war crimes. It is that it is a knowledge that should not be instrumentalized, especially not in political purposes, because actually instrumentalization of genocide or remembrance on war crimes is actually equal to distortion of the remembrance on Holocaust or any other genocide in that term. So the point of education about the Holocaust and genocide is that it must not be instrumentalized in any way.
Thank you. Before I call on Tomislav, I'll make a comment. First of all, we've created an invaluable document or historical source with today's conference. And this provides a wonderful, really important milestone in Holocaust education. So by creating this conference, we've already at least gone some of the way to answering John's question and reinforcing what the other speakers have said. As far as the political outcome of this, we have to remember that the first lesson of the Holocaust is never again. And so therefore, there has to be an understanding that this Holocaust education does require a political understanding that without this knowledge, the Serbian people in particular, not to mention Jews or Romas, are under threat. And so therefore, I think we've said this at previous JRI conferences, that the Jasenovats, the issue of Jasenovats and the issue of the Holocaust and genocide in general, is actually an issue of national security for Serbs. It's a Serbian national security issue that the government has to take seriously. It has to institute the proper kinds of memorialization as Israel would do. Now, of course, we can also go too far, as Israel has gone. Israel is a good cautionary tale about how the about the instrumentalization, as Davor puts it, of the Holocaust could go to the point of committing another genocide, as Israel has done against people in Gaza. So, obviously there has to be a balance, but nevertheless, we should not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have to understand that we have to there are many levels. There's education, there's scholarship, there's publication, and there's also commemoration, which is somewhat different. And also that goes to I think, the state level. But anyway, we should call on our other speakers so that everybody has a chance to ask questions or make comments. I see Tomislav was the next person. Go ahead, Tomislav.
Dear Barry, thank you very much. And Ola, thank you very much for the Zoom link and invitation. Thank you very much to all the presenters. Lots of great information. In 1941, my dad was 9 years old when a Jewish neighbor visited my grandfather in Slavenska Požega in western Slavonia, which was only 82 kilometers from Jasenovac. Sadly, the Jewish neighbor was never seen again. In 1943, my 11-year-old dad escaped a Ustasha firing squad. Our family and neighbors were liberated by the 13th Partisan Brigade. Later, in 1943, the Ustasha and Nazis forced my family to watch as my paternal grandmother was burned alive in the family home on Holy Wednesday, 1943. 6 other relatives were killed during World War II. Kurt Waldheim was active in that area of the former Yugoslavia and later became UN Secretary General. I visited Jasenovac's memorial in 1988. My family lost 7 members each during World War II and the 1990 civil wars. According to the United Nations, my father's village was among the first ethnically cleansed by the Ustasha in 1991. My aunts, uncles, and cousins barely escaped. I agree with John that the Holocaust should be taught in Croatian schools. Here's my question. During a past JRI conference, there was discussion about excavating remains located mostly on the Republika side of the Sava River. Are there any new developments on this issue? Thank you, Father.
Sasha, you want to take over?
Well, so far, I haven't heard anything official. I do have to stress this out. We know that Ustasha did extensive destruction of evidences before leaving the camp. It is possible that the communist authorities did certain similar things too for their own reasons. What the Croatian revisionists are suggesting, that there are people, Croats that were buried there, like the members of Domobrani or Ustasha soldiers, that doesn't seem too probable to me. But once again, we need to take caution when speaking about it. I don't see that happening. I don't see that actually. What I'm actually very afraid of, that if they started excavating and don't find anything or find a lesser number than it is expected, it can be even more harmful than not to excavate at all. Because we don't know, actually. We know about huge mass execution places in Gradina, in Gradiška. We know that I have seen myself medical reports on over 1,300 bodies that reach Belgrade. The body that was killed in Jasenovac, it needs 2 months to travel via River Sava to float to the Belgrade. Yeah. So I'm honestly, I for now there is no new development, and I'm not sure there will be any. For one thing is for sure, that is very expensive undertaking. It requires speciality that I'm not sure either Serbia or Republika Srpska at this moment possessed. And also, I'm very afraid that if the starting excavation show nothing or lesser number, it will just fuel the additional wave of revisionism from Croatian side. So honestly, with this situation as it is now, I'm not sure if any exhumations of that kind should be done at all, because we know that there were extensive actions taken to destroy the evidences. But this comes into the field of forensics and anthropology. I'm not really qualified to comment on that. Maybe some forensic expert would give you much better or more detailed insight and maybe more better estimates what result can be expected in excavations 8 years after the crime was committed.
Maybe Milan, since Milan spoke about the pits in Herzegovina, maybe he'd like to comment. I was curious about that question myself.
In 1990 and 1991, a few pits in Herzegovina was exhumated, and there is a parts of 12. It was 12 pits in Herzegovina, and they find around 4,000 people or 4,000 parts of bodies, and all that parts of human bodies was put in Prebilovci, some kind of memorial center, but that memorial center was ruined in a civil war during 1992. So that's the only thing we made about exhumations of deaths in pits in Herzegovina or Dalmatia or Lika, where pits used for that kind of extermination.
Although I would have to add one small detail. Pits were much more suitable for conserving the human remains because they are deep underground. There are no erosion caused by river, or they were much more difficult to destroy the evidence, because someone would have to go down and use dynamite or explosive. It was just too much trouble. While the floodlines near the river are much more complex, unstable ground. I would say that from that perspective, it could also be more problematic.
Davor, did you want to say something about that?
No, to be honest, I don't have any information about the excavations.
Tamara?
Here.
Sorry, me neither.
Oh, all right. So then our next question or comment will come from Jake. Jake, go ahead.
Hi, I'll try to make this quick because I got some really bad allergies. But the phrase that comes to mind when I hear this is that phrase, like a lie can travel halfway across the world while the truth is putting on its shoes. It just seems like, I remember talking to Dr. Barry Latucci about this, trying to get the numbers for the Jasenovac memorial, and you can find numbers and they're not correct according to a lot of what I'm getting from this report here today. And it just seems like there's so much we have to do educating people to get that across. And I was just hearing what the answers were to the education system there. People are not even aware of genocide. I mean, and is that the biggest fear, is that it's just more of a political issue than a lack of interest for people to go into this? Because it's horrifying what you go into this, but I think it's fascinating. I found today to be very interesting. I didn't even know about the forced conversions to like Catholicism. Like I wonder if the papacy has ever mentioned that. And maybe that would help if they did mention it. I mean, I would say the Pope today is is an all right guy. I mean, he's American, but you know, what is it that I guess my question is to everyone is like, what is the biggest fear that you have as you research this? Is it just like a lack of interest, or because like I was just hearing like the last survivor of Auschwitz passed away. I don't know if that's true, but I was reading something about it, and I go, oh no, well, who can we interview for these, to get like actual sources and whatnot? And it's a shame. Like it's becoming harder to get more concrete research now as we go through the years, and it just takes so much time to document this and get it right. Because you want to be thorough about this. This is a science. And it just seems that, as time goes by, people just, there's more crap that's in front of you than there is actual truth. And so it becomes difficult. It's a little pessimistic, but I don't know if anyone wants to comment about that. That's kind of an open-ended question to everyone.
Sasha?
Yeah, well, when it comes to the victims number, honestly, the only 100% honest and correct answer one scholar can give you is that the number of murdered people in Jasenovac and in the NDH in total is not been established and most likely will never be established. Not exactly, even approximately, because so much destruction and evidence destruction was done that it's very unlikely, even if we had all the technology, all the permissions from Croatian and Bosnian authorities to conduct any kind of research. There is a genuine fear what lies below the level of the ground, and unfortunately that ship has sailed. In 1945, 1946, 1947, if someone was interested enough to do the exhumations, to try to collect as many statements of the victims, maybe it was possible. Reflecting to Tamara's presentation, you saw that, for example, we know later, even Barry wrote in his own book, for example, the statement about murder of 200 children with a sledgehammer in Jasenovac. That was a testimony given by a Jewish guy called Tzadik Danon Bratza. He later lived and died in Belgrade. The reason why he was not being why he wasn't giving the statement to the state commission, to the investigators, he was in army. He was fighting the remaining Ustasha at the time, and later he was, he was mobilized until the late 1945, 1946. So he wasn't there when they were taking, the statements, and he's not the only one. So we only had a partial, fragmental knowledge about it. Luckily we had many statements later. We have a lot of narrative materials to compare, but when it comes to the actual how it should be done, like the exhumations, like it was done in many cases for the wars of 1990s or the wars elsewhere in the world, or using the contemporary methodology of anthropology and forensics, that ship has sailed a long time ago. And what remained is for us, to constantly fight with Croats about the number. But I want to emphasize this. It's not about the number. It's about how horrific was that concentration camp and the NDH in total. These people, they were the victims. They were not murdered like Jews in Eastern Europe or Central Europe as some kind of industrialized killing. They were slaughtered with passion. There was a high level of involvement of perpetrator in each murder. I was referring to 1,300 pathology reports I had a chance to look at. Less than 10 people were killed with firearms. Others were either slaughtered with knives or had their brains and heads cracked with axes and hammers and various kinds of blood trauma and body mutilation. You couldn't believe that, and we are talking about 99% of the victims that were precisely examined by the pathologists at that moment. So the nature of the crime is even more horrific. And unfortunately for me personally, I gave up on hope that we will ever gonna have an exact number. But to be correct, we can say, using the Yad Vashem methodology, for example, the smallest actual number are the people who are identified by name, and we are talking about more than 90,000 at the moment. That's not a small number at all. Only in Jasenovac, we have 40,000 in Gospić Čadonopag. We have various other massacre sites with few hundreds and few thousands. Altogether, we are talking about hundreds of thousands of victims. We have forced conversions, we had deportations, so we are talking about systematic genocide. And I think, the good thing is that even our colleagues from Croatia are not, declining it anymore. They're not negating it. They're not relativizing it. It will take some time, probably, to reach the level John desired. So that is something mandatory in Croatia, or something that will be a part of, everyday education and remembrance culture. But still, I think it went far from the positions we used to have only 20 or 30 years ago.
Agree.
That's at least my
We
perception.
have made some progress, but it's still a long road ahead. And I think you said it all when you said the total number of victims will have to be satisfied with hundreds of thousands, and leave it at that. If everybody recognizes that, that's enough, I think. That's actually what we have on the Jasenovac monument in New York. Hundreds of thousands. No exact number, but just hundreds of thousands. And that's, I think, the most accurate that we can come up with. Because after all, for every victim that we have a name for, there's probably at least one that we don't have a name for, right? So it has to be hundreds of thousands. But Milan, or Davor, or Tamara, do you want to add to comment to Jake's question or comment?
When it comes to the numbers, I agree with Atso that unfortunately we are not able to give the exact number, and we will, unfortunately, never will be. But when we are speaking about Jasenovac and genocide in independent state of Croatia, maybe it's more important. I don't say that numbers are not important, but it is more important the very character and of that crime, and it is that without any doubt it was a genocide over the Serbs, Jews, and Roma, and it was, let me say, example of genocide from school books, such as Holocaust. So it is the most important fact that we must defend when we speak about truth about Jasenovac.
Tamara, do you want to add something, or?
Yeah, I want to just to add something. Together with preserve and study historical sources, documentation, photographies, I just wanted to say that something that we can do is encourage young people to research, to try to find out in their places, whatever, do they know somebody who had somebody in concentration camp, for example, Jasenovac for now, and cooperation between museums, schools, university, international organizations can do one thing. I like to say that memory is not only the look into the past, it's also a warning for the future. And if we research and speak like now about this subject, that is at least something that we can do.
Milan? Thank you, Tamara. Milan, do you want to add to that?
No, just one thing. I mentioned early 12 pits in Herzegovina that were completely uncovered. The problem with pits in Herzegovina and Dalmatia and Lika, especially in Herzegovina, is that communist authorities had sealed some of them with concrete. We can only guess why. Oh, that's the whole thing.
I know John is next, but I wanted just to refer everyone to Tomislav Georgievic's comment on chat that the complicity of the Roman Catholic Church has never been acknowledged in regard to the crimes of genocide committed in former Yugoslavia, and that's a pretty important. We were participants in the JRI was participant in the Vatican lawsuit, and I think that's even though the American Pope now is a fairly seems to be a fairly reasonable person in many respects, I think it would be helpful to keep this issue in front of his face in the future. And indeed with the Catholic Church in general. John, you wanted to say something or add something? Unmute yourself, please.
If there's nobody waiting in line still.
Yeah, is there anyone else who wanted? I mean, but John, you go ahead and we'll call on somebody else. It won't take too long, will you?
I always argue with my fellow historians because I graduated in history as well. There's no such thing as a ship that has sailed. In fact, the Ark was found on Mount Ararat, and that's a ship that sailed, and we're still studying it. So in history, the fundamental concept is there is no ship that has sailed and has to be forgotten. That's why we're interested in history. Every ship that has sailed is current focus for a historian. That's number one. Number two, if we take no action as JRI, and me as a Serb, Barry, you as a Jew and Serb, if we take no action following our studies and our conferences, we are denigrating the memory of the people whose memory we have brought to the public eye. Because the studies, there is no such thing, for example, as a complete history. We will never know the exact number of people killed by NDH. We will never know that. Neither will anybody ever know the exact number of people killed by Adolf Hitler and his Nazi allies in the Holocaust. But when somebody says the number 6 million, nobody says, well, we'll never know the real number. You can't say that. So we've failed in remembering and commemorating our own dead. We're guilty now. And I believe it was Elie Wiesel who said that the forgetting of the victims is killing them again. We in JRI, by failing to act in the future, I'm not talking now, I'm talking about our onward purpose, has to be to act on what we've discovered and to try to make such crimes at least unlikely to happen in the future. And if the horror and the extent of these crimes is not fully exposed in 3D Panavision, we are failing to use today's current technology to present history in a manner that can be digested by our children who've been raised using flat screen telephones and playing video games. If we don't translate our books from hieroglyphics into visual information that is instantly understood, We're failing in our mission. So I'm going to suggest at some point, doesn't have to be today, but I suggest that JRI needs to form a working group, an actual working group for which we raise a budget to institutionalize actual physical and activities of commemoration that will outlive all of us. That's our mission. If we fail to do that mission, we've just put a few more books on the bookshelves that will never be read because they don't know the title of the book, because they don't know what Jasenovac is, and they don't know what NDH is, and they don't have a clue about what we suffered. This is our absolute mandatory function as JRI. Otherwise, we're just passing observers of what will become to be not remembered as inconsequential events. I can't stress this enough. Working group, or we've done nothing.
John, let's not forget that JRI did establish 2 monuments in New York City for Jasenovac and for Yadovno.
Agreed.
And
just
also,
saying that if we measure,
we have pushed very hard in the past for the government to recognize April 22nd as a national holiday because of the self-liberation and martyrdom of the last inmates of Jasenovac, which is an absolute national necessity, I think.
Agreed. But Barry, if you went to sleep tonight and you had a dream about all of the things that we could do, everything that we've done wouldn't be a drop in the water compared to the oceans of what we could do. And I think
that's why JRI exists. I mean, what you're talking about is why JRI exists, is because the rest of the world suppressed and refused to recognize this. It wasn't just Croats. We can't just blame Croats.
I'm not blaming just Croats. I'm blaming us.
We can blame the United States, British, French, Germans, Israelis. They're all to blame.
But most of all, I blame us. Because the teller of the story has to be the victim.
Please.
No, I'm just saying. Actually, I do that frequently. If you want to fix something, start with yourself. You know, you can't convince somebody else to do some things that need to be done, but you can convince yourself. And if even a small group of us, even 5 of us, formed a permanent working group that every year makes 3 actions that raise visibility on the mass scale. I'm very happy we have a monument in the Holocaust Park in New York.
2.
Right. But I'm very happy that it's there. But I can suggest that the number of citizens of America who have seen that monument or even know of its existence is less than 1/1,000,000th of 1%, which I don't consider success. I studied engineering. A success rate of 1/1,000,000th of 1% is not what we call a success. Okay? So I'm 65 now, and they say life starts at 65. And I would like to make a 5-year mission from this year till 2031 that we create a working group that has to come up with physical, in-your-face recollections. I also suggest that while we do have a national holiday on April 22nd, we should declare April 10th, the foundation day of NDH, of the independent state of Croatia, as Genocide Day in Serbia. Because it's the most direct linkage to the genocide that we've suffered. And that day should be Genocide Day in Serbia. Their national day needs to be our Genocide Day. You have to do that. And this is like Marat said when they were leading the French Revolution. They said, audacity, audacity, and more audacity. Without that, we will be forgotten, our good intentions will be forgotten, and all of the dead will be forgotten forever.
Let the presenters comment if they wish. Sasha?
Well, I agree that something more can be done. Maybe I'm not envisaging it at the large scale as John is, but yeah, more concrete actions can be done, and we shouldn't skip the opportunity to do them. Especially I see that as a division
Division of
of
labor.
of labor.
Yeah.
I will produce the content, and whoever is skilled in that should disseminate it to the world. And I think it's a win-win combination because it's necessary. John is right; it's necessary. But I would like to just bring to your attention. It's almost 10 p.m. in
Oh
Serbia,
my goodness.
and all of
We
us
do.
except our have small children.
Oh
So
my goodness. I'm so
we,
sorry.
we need to wrap this up in a
You're
15 minutes or
quite
so.
correct. You're quite correct.
Okay.
But before Tomislav, there's somebody iPhone. Could you unmute yourself, iPhone person? We can't see who you are. Wanted to recognize the person who has a box that says iPhone. Maybe we can't. Can we help unmute that person? We'll find out who that is.
We can only ask them to unmute, but we can't unmute them ourselves.
No, yes, but I did ask them to unmute, but they're not. They have their hand up, but who is this person?
We can go with Tom for
Okay, let's
now.
go to Tomislav. Tom?
Guys, my comments will be briefer. First of all, thank you, Barry, for answering the Vatican Bank question, and Jake for asking about it. I think I'd like to do two brief screen shares about ways of increasing attention. So the first is if I could share my screen, I'd like to do that, please.
Go
If
ahead.
that's allowed. All right.
You need to make Tom a co-host so he can
I have
share.
to make him a co-host, but I just allowed him to
if you allow them, then you don't need to.
Okay.
Okay, let me try to do the share. My first share with regards to stuff in your face is with, I don't know if you guys can see that. It's a picture of Nikola Jokic in 2023 after the Denver Nuggets won the NBA championship. Now, his wife, Natalia, was a refugee from Ula. She's 9 months old on the left side of the photo in 1995, in August of 95. So that way I show what happened to her. And he's one of the best players in the world. He's up, the MVP will be announced in about 4 hours. He's one of the best basketball players in the world. So that's one of the ways that John was talking about stuff in your face. This is a reminder of what happened during ULA. Now, with regards to what happened at Jasenovac, another thing I'd like to share is Dr. Gideon Grif's book, which is in Serbian, Jasenovac, Auschwitz of the Balkans. Now, Barry and I have known each other for about 30 years since we met at the New School. It was the Sean Travassi was presenting. And if you asked me in 1996 if we would get a prominent Israeli historian such as Dr. Grif to write a book about Jasenovac, I told you would have been crazy. Barry got the ball rolling with the 1997 conference, and John, who I've known for almost 20 years since we met at Vidovdan in Canada. So all these steps over the past 30 plus years have gotten us to this point. So if you folks want to take a screenshot of this, I try to put it in the chat, but the chat only allows me to do it to one person, to Barry. So what I could do is I could put it to Barry, and but if you guys want to take a screenshot of this, you please feel free to do so. This one is of Dr. Gideon Grif.
He's not the only Israeli historian who's written on Jasenovac, by the way.
Correct. But I just wanted to point that out. And then this is the one with
although
Nicola,
he's a good friend of ours. Yes.
And yes, he is.
That's Greif.
Greif. I'm sorry. It's Greif. So wanted to stop the share. I'll try to post the comment in the Barry, one to you. If there's somehow you could share it with the entire
Thank you,
audience, I would
Thomas.
appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Who else who hasn't spoken who would like to ask a question or make a comment? Is there someone I'm sure there must be someone else on our among our participants. I'm
Olya,
trying.
Olya.
Olya, would you like to say something?
Yes, I was just going to comment what John suggested was correct. Like if we can make, April 10th the day of Independent State Croatia Genocide Day, but I'm sure to all of you who live in Serbia is well known that the big problem is that the parliament in Serbia cannot even pass resolution about Jasenovac. And this is in a fight for last 4 or 5 years. And for, I think, in month and a half ago was very important conference in a Serbian assembly about trying to, when all historians who are really like A-listers in history, Vasilije Krestic, Jovan Pejin, and Miloš Kojić, they were all over there trying to push for this. Also, our dear friend Bastasic was there. Unfortunately, we didn't have a chance to even discuss this, but I think that would be number one. If we can support that, I don't know how political would this be. Sasha would probably know, considering the situation in Serbia. So that's number one. And number two, I think that I would like to mention on this conference is Miss Orna. I think that she's from Israel, and she's also a survivor of person who was in Jasenovac, same as my grandfather. And then we have another person, her name is Andrea Jeftanovic, who reached out to us, and her grandfather was Serb from Sarajevo, was the wealthiest person in Sarajevo before the Second World War. The owner of Hotel Europa was killed in Jasenovac. So three of us, a shared memory of our loved ones, we got involved with this organization, reach out, and this is also one of the way to show that memory of Jasenovac and horrific genocide in the independent state of Croatia committed against Serbs, Jews, and Roma is still living, and we will not give up on this. So thank you.
Thank you, Olya. Would the presenters like to comment on that, or? I know that Sasha, you want us to wrap up soon, right? How much more time do we have?
5 minutes, maybe.
Okay. Are there any other participants who'd like to comment before we wrap up? Perhaps Orna, would you like to say something? Oh, I'm sorry. We have to unmute you.
She mentioned me. Yes, I am the granddaughter of Albert Maestro. You hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
And I found his testimony on a tape and translated, and he also gave his testimony. And in 2 weeks, I shall be in Jasenovac to visit the first time and to see what happened there. But I understood that there is no evidence. But it's very important to me to be there for my grandfather.
That is very well received. Did Sasha, do you want to comment, or?
Well, unfortunately, at the Jasenovac Memorial Place, there is very little information except the most general ones, and also instrumentalized according to the Croatian nationalistic policies. They are actually, the outdoor exhibition is dedicated to Bogdan Bogdanovic as a political opponent of Slobodan Milošević. Of all things, in Jasenovac, the last time I was there, this was the case. So it's crazy. But I will do. I want to encourage you to go to Jasenovac village and go to the documentary center, which is ran by Vladika Jovan Čulibrk, because they have a huge library there, which is supplied by both books from Serbia, Israel, Croatia, etc. And there is a good chance you will be able to find at least some reliable information there, and also maybe some of the scholars.
Can you repeat the name? Can you please
Yes.
repeat the name?
It's a documentary center in the Jasenovac village. It's a special building next to the Orthodox Church. There is no way you can miss it. You just go to the Orthodox Church. Actually, it's a monastery, and ask. They will take you to there. It's very easy to go. It's the
Okay,
central
thank you.
building in the entire village, so you won't have any in the entire town. You won't have any problem finding it.
Okay, thank you.
Davor, did you
Thank
want
you.
to say something, or Milan?
No, I think I've said mostly everything I planned.
Yeah. Milan,
Yeah.
would you like to comment?
Just one thing. Orna should definitely visit the Ustasha Hospital. It is the only preserved building from the Jasenovac camp. So it's an object close to the documentary center that Alexander mentioned. So it is the interesting thing and important, of course.
That is interesting.
Um,
Yes. Anyone else would like to comment before we wrap up the 24th annual conference?
yeah, Norman, very
Yes.
quickly, very quickly. It's been a great conference. It's important for us to get the recording and begin to post the recording far and wide. But it's
Yes.
been a great conference, and in the conference, we made our major points, and we challenged the continued, quote, revisionist distortion of history.
Thank you. Thank
Hey
you.
Barry, can you hear
Thank
me?
Yes, Michael. Yes.
Yeah, I did some filming in Banja Luka with Jovan Kuliberg. And Kuliberg, yeah. I returned to Banja Luka and NATO was jamming all the radios in the village in Operation Combined Endeavor. And I was with some local Serbs and we went to Drakulic area and we were attacked by an Ustachi soldier.
Hello. Hi.
Yeah. And I was in the back seat. I couldn't believe my eyes. And the elder Serb said that Ustachi. I was in the back seat. And it was an Ustachi soldier. He raised up his arm. He's going to jump on our vehicle. I couldn't believe it. He said Ustachi is right near a cemetery in Drakulic area. And I was so astonished. And we got out of the area and went to another area, a church where his family was killed in the 1990s. Some of his family members were killed in World War II and some in the 1990s. Is one of the Serbs. We was in the Kozara barracks where NATO was flying their flags and they were jamming all the radios. But it was like deja vu from World War II. I couldn't believe it. But this Ustachi soldier come out into the Drakulic area and we're going along the cemetery and he tried to jump on our vehicle, I guess. And he said Ustachi and we got out of there. And I couldn't believe it.
I guess that points to the ever-present threat of neo-fascism today, and it's a very real danger. We shouldn't ignore it or downplay it. In fact, I think the United States is promoting it and has been promoting it for quite a while. But of course, we have a president who actually is an admirer of Adolf Hitler. So it shouldn't be surprising that we are in the situation that we are today. So yes, Holocaust commemoration and Holocaust scholarship, they go hand in hand. And we as JRI, we exist as an organization because of the lessons of what we learned in the 1990s, that the Holocaust institutions are not going to do this job for us. We cannot rely on Yad Vashem. We can't rely on U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. We can't rely on London or Paris or Berlin or any of these, or the European Union. They will not do this job. That's why JRI is important, and that's why JRI exists. John, do you want to add one last point? Because I know we have to wrap up now, like in the next 2 minutes. John, did you unmute yourself? John?
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, you're unmuted now.
Just a question. Are we making any resolutions at this meeting, or are we leading that
No,
until
I don't think
next
we have
week or a
time
future
for,
meeting?
we'll have to have that at a later date. By the way, I should point out, and I especially want to point out to Orna that we're going to put the survivor testimonies, the videotape, onto our website. And when you see the survivors speak for themselves, that's in itself an incredible experience. And of course, all of these survivors have passed on by this point, but we have them on video. We took the precaution to videotape them when nobody else would. In fact, we organized what is the director's name in California who set up the videotape of the Holocaust survivors? I can't remember his name now.
I don't remember it
You
right
know, the
now.
guy who made
Yeah,
Schindler's List.
yeah, I do.
What's
Spielberg.
his
Can't
name?
his name.
Spielberg, maybe Spielberg.
Yeah.
Spielberg. Yeah,
Spielberg.
we brought Spielberg's organization to meet the survivors back in 1997. They wouldn't have done it otherwise. And that's why they have those recordings. So we as an institution are important. We don't have very many resources. We don't have a big budget, unfortunately, but we're doing the best we can. And budgetary concerns are a problem. So if you know anybody who can make a donation to JRI, that would be very much appreciated. I would be remiss if I didn't bring that up today. Anyway, I want to thank Alexander Stoyanovich especially, but also Tamara Stoyanovich, Davor Stipic, and of course Milan Gulic for their superb presentations at the 24th Annual JRI Conference. And I want to thank everyone for participating this year. And I want to thank my JRI colleagues, especially Pero and Olya, as well as John and everyone else for their help. Any last words, Sasha, from you before we close up this
No,
year?
it's been a great honor, and I hope to be with you the next year as well.
Yes,
With some new
absolutely.
research, with some new facts, some new data, hopefully.
And also, maybe we can make more progress on commemoration and remembrance as well. So
Definitely.
thank you, everyone. And with that, I will wish you well and see you again next year. Thank you.
Follow
Good
Barry.
night.
Thank you,
everybody.
Barry.
Thank you.
Thank you.